have a gavel this evening. Oh, thank you. Good evening, and welcome to the October 22nd joint meeting of the Carson City Open Space Advisory Committee and the Parks and Recreation Commission, excuse me. Let's have a roll call. Madam Secretary.
Open Space Advisory Committee members, Chairperson Scott, Vice Chair Alan Welch, present. Member Evans, present. Member Hall, here. Member Inverson, here. Member Masad, Member Michael, here. The quorum is present. Parks and Recreation Commission members, Chairperson Kiever, here. Vice Chair Curtis, Commissioner Bagwell, here. Commissioner Cassiopo, Commissioner Cartwright, here. Commissioner Long, Commissioner Meyer. Here. A quorum is also present.
Madam Secretary, for the record, please show Vice Chair Curtis as excused.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Let's move for possible action on approval of minutes. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's have public comment. Is there any public comment?
Not on an item on the agenda.
No. I'm sorry. Not on an item just yet. I apologize.
General.
All right. All right. Let's move to possible action on approval of minutes.
Madam Chair, the minutes were approved in each individual meeting from the last joint meeting.
Okay, so we can skip that. Thank you. Modifications to the agenda. Does any of the commissioners or the commission members wish to modify the agenda? Anybody in the audience have any comments on this? Then let's move on to what I think we've all been waiting for possible action, review and discussion, and possible recommendation to the Board of Supervisors regarding technical corrections to the Carson City Lands Bill. And I believe, Jennifer, you're going to explain this for us?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. Stephanie Hicks, the city's property manager, and myself will be sort of tag teaming with the presentation.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. For the record, Stephanie Hicks, Real Property Manager. We wanted to just provide a little bit of background of how we got here today. In August of this year, Congressman Amodei presented an update to our Board of Supervisors regarding some of the activities that were going on in the legislature. And at that point, it was first brought to our attention that we had an opportunity to come back and prepare a technical map correction to the Lands Bill as it was approved initially in 2009, and then we received properties after that through 2014. The timeline for this has moved rather quickly, and some of the reasons for that are because there's potentially an opportunity to get into a bill before the end of this year, and so that's a great opportunity for us. But we still want to be thoughtful in our approach and make sure that we're not missing any information or missing any opportunities, and so we appreciate the opportunity to come here for this joint meeting. In August, on the 23rd, we also met with the Legislative Director, Molly Lowe, from Congressman Amodei's office. She gave us some details about the information that we would need to collect and how to put this together. And since then, we have followed up with the Bureau of Land Management to discuss some potential items with them. We also met with the Porter Group, which is the city's lobbyist group for the legislation, Carson City School District, the airport, and then also Cinder Light, who's one of the mining operations that is on one of the properties. And we have had some input and discussions as well from individuals of the public that have contacted us. We've tried to address all of those things in our presentation that we'll be giving you this evening. So just before we get too far along, we wanted to kind of go over some of the terms or definitions that we're using, just so everybody's kind of understanding things on the same level. When we refer to a disposal, we are referring to a sale of land to the public. Reversionary interest is another item that we'll discuss, and essentially for the lands that have been conveyed to the city by BLM, if the city used those properties for other than the purposes of the Lands Bill, which include natural areas and open space, river and floodplain preservation, or parks and public purposes, if if the city uses that property for something other than those, there is a reversionary clause in the patent that means that property reverts back to the United States. So we'll be talking about removing reversionary interest from some properties. We're also going to talk a little bit about third-party use, which essentially is a contract or agreement with a third party by the city to conduct work or provide services on city land. And I think one of the best examples that we have that most people are familiar with is Eagle Valley Golf Course and the fact that that's being managed right now by Duncan Golf. And so that's considered a third-party use. And then lastly, one of the terms that we're going to talk about is the Carson City Special Account. In the original lands bill, there is a provision that proceeds from sale of any of the properties BLM has identified for disposal goes into two different places. The first place is that 5% of that is paid directly to the state, and it goes into general education use. The remaining 95% is only accessible by the Secretary of BLM, and it's for two reasons. The first of which is to reimburse BLM for any costs that were associated with those disposals. So that could be appraisals, survey work, environmental work. And then the second use of that funding is to acquire environmentally sensitive land or interest in environmentally sensitive land in Carson City. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we would like to propose some changes to that so that the city has more involvement in the use of those funds, and also that, there's different things we can use it for as well. But we just wanted to kind of give a basis of what those definitions are before we move forward.
Madam Chair, Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. So we're going to try to walk through each of these parcels and just give you some broad background of what we're discussing. There's nothing finalized. If we have anything incorrect in your packet, those would be good things to note. But if we could get through the entire overview and then we can answer questions at the end, I think that would probably be the easiest, so we don't get too caught up and then we end up going back and forth between parcels, just so we can keep everybody kind of focused, if that's okay with you. Okay. So the first parcel of discussion is that blue square on your screen, and it's approximately 39 acres. The green area to the west is East Silver Saddle Ranch. The area to the east is all Bureau of Land Management land. So this was actually, it's currently owned by BLM. It is an in-holding, and Sierra Vista Lane runs through the parcel. Recently, we've received a Federal Lands Access Program grant, done several improvements on Sierra Vista Lane, which the Open Space Advisory Committee was essential in reviewing that project and helping work with the public on. So the city is maintaining and operating that road network already. The city, through the Open Space Division, is managing the land surrounding that blue parcel. So it's an important part of East Silver Saddle. It's something that the BLM is not currently managing or maintaining. So our recommendation for this is to transfer the ownership from Bureau of Land Management to Carson City, so there's continuity with operations and maintenance and consistency throughout. So if there's any issues with the Carson City Municipal Code, I don't think the park rangers or the sheriff's office wants to check if their foot's on BLM or if their foot's on city land or things like that. So just for consistency of enforcement, we're recommending acquisition of this. The original intent with the previous lands bill was that this was going to come to the city, and there was actually an error on the map that went to Congress, and it was incorrectly labeled as Bureau of Indian Affairs. And actually the Bureau of Indian Affairs parcel is further south, and it's that orange parcel at the bottom of your map. So it was incorrectly labeled, which is why it didn't come to the city in the first place. So this would just correct that previous action. Oh, just some other comments as well is some management. When we talk about operations and management, it includes a portion of the river, natural resource management, wildlife. We've already done improvements to the adjacent parcels. It would really be helpful for us to have that continuity throughout. So we're not addressing weed issues or other natural resource management issues compartmentalized in an approach. So it would just be more consistent throughout that river corridor. This next one is the 4 yellow parcels that you'll see in the center of that map. Arrowhead Lane, or Arrowhead Road, bisects those 4 parcels from the east to the west. North-south to the east is Gonai. The airport is southeast of this, the bottom right-hand corner of that yellow parcel there. The runway aims right at those 4 parcels. Also on the property is the Cinder Light operation. To give you some background of that, we spoke with the Cinder Light folks, and they have 8 5-acre mill site claims, and they're not all contiguous. They're throughout the property. They go both north of Arrowhead and south of Arrowhead for a total of 40 acres throughout that site. It's currently, all 4 acres is approximately 73.25 acres. The current ownership is Carson City. We received the lands from BLM through the last lands bill. Our recommended interest is to remove reversionary interest, and this is not the intent to sell these parcels in any way, shape, or form. It's to allow for a third-party agreement to be able to occur. Currently, under our existing arrangement through how we acquired it from the lands bills, we can't enter into any third-party agreements with the land. And our intent is to still allow for the mill site claims. We have no interest in trying to take away their rights to the property. These mill site claims are actually a very important part of the history of Carson City. They're from the 1800s, and they provide, valuable resources from Cinder Light for projects all throughout the region. So it's something very special and unique about Carson City that we have here. And those mill sites, as he explained it to me, to just try to simplify that for the public, is they're like easements that run with the land. So it's not something we intend to take away or want to change his rights, but it runs with the land in perpetuity. And I asked him about the time frame for those mill site claims. Would it be 10 years? Would it be 20 years? What is anticipated for the life of those claims and really getting valuable resources out of the land? And his answer was well over 100 years. So those mill site claims are going to be active and operational for at least our lifetime and well into the future for future generations. So I do want to point out that in the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, which was developed in 2007, so pre-recession, pre-multipurpose athletic center, to just give you some context, this site was identified in 3 different manners. One is for an indoor recreational facility, which we now have the MAC. Also for a potential sports complex location, and also as a potential community park site. So knowing that we have these mill site claims, either that would be on locations where maybe a park could potentially happen and then get dug up, or be right next to active mining activities, it's most likely not the best location for that purpose now. It might be in 100 years, and we don't want to preclude that from ever being an opportunity. But the greatest need right now is for Cinder Light's operation, obviously, to continue. And that assignment right was assigned over to us from BLM, as well as the airport buffer. We've met with the airport staff a couple different times. They just updated their airport master plan, and safety is a top priority for them. And they want to make sure the surrounding neighborhood is protected, and that there's, in addition to the runway, a little bit of a buffer, which is pretty standard with airport operations, to make sure that the public is protected. So they're in support of that. I think that we have someone here tonight that can talk to that under public comment as well. But just some background on that parcel. The next site is 6 parcels. Those are the hatched parcels in the middle of your screen. To the left or to the west is Edmonds, and then running through it is Kuntz and Conti, and then to the right of your map or to the east is Prison Hill Recreation Area. There is a water line easement going north, south, and east and west. Our water tanks are just east of the parcel on city land. This is also access for our trailhead at Prison Hill, and it's a heavily used area. It's very disturbed. A lot of off-highway vehicle use. There's a lot of illegal dumping and some other issues of that. The site's 27.56 acres. Our recommended action, so it's currently owned by BLM. We're recommending disposal by BLM to the public for this. The rationale is that it's an in-holding that the Bureau of Land Management is not currently managing or maintaining. We get calls on a weekly basis. I know Supervisor Bagwell has been out there with us numerous times with citizens concerned about high centering vehicles and just safety issues and the concerns about this site in particular. So we're hoping that someone could purchase it from BLM and do improvements to the site, whatever that might be. Should that site be sold, it would have to go through the normal city processes for approval. Right now, the zoning is single-family 1 acre, but if someone came in and wanted to change that, it'd have to go through the normal city planning processes. So we just wanted to make sure that that was clear. That was some of the questions that we received from the public already. Also, the public has expressed they want to make sure that access is maintained to the trailhead. That's very important. Some of the questions and comments that we've reached out to community development to talk about this site as well. What would happen if someone came forward, even whether wanting to develop one parcel for one house or a couple different more? What would they have to do? Most likely, Kuntz would have to be improved all the way through to the water tanks. So that would actually improve the existing access as it sits, and that's a real concern. And there aren't financial resources to improve that road on BLM land right now. We did put it in our CIP plan, but there were millions of dollars of needs, and it just wasn't selected. But we did bring that to the Board of Supervisors.
And I would just like to add one thing to that. There is also a reservation for an easement in the lower left-hand corner for a detention basin. So that, as well as the water lines that Jen mentioned, would be reserved for the city to retain.
Thank you. I forgot about that. There is significant drainage parcels or problems through those 6 parcels as well. If you look on Edmonds, that drain inlet that's on Edmonds is constantly fill. The stormwater folks are constantly having trouble and issues, and if you see it after flooding, it's pretty significant. So some improvements to the site would hopefully improve some of those situations that are being experienced there. The next site is, to orient you, this is off of Bennett and Gentry. To the east, about 2 blocks, is Prison Hill Recreation Area. To the west, just a few blocks, about 3 or 4 blocks to the west, is Pete Livermore Sports Complex. So very close to 2 very active recreation areas. It's 17.45 acres. The current ownership is Carson City. We also received this from the Bureau of Land Management in the Oplama lands bill. The recommended action is to revert back to BLM for disposal. It is not currently needed for any parks or recreation proper components. It's so close to 2 major recreation areas. It would be a duplication to try to develop that in a recreation fashion, an active recreation fashion, because we have so much going on at Pete Livermore and between Prison Hill. We have quite a bit of uses in that area already. It could be, we're recommending reversion back to BLM. They could sell it for the public. Adjacent neighbors could have the opportunity to purchase it if they wanted to expand their open space. It is currently zoned single-family 1 acre, so whatever would be proposed would also go through the normal city processes that we discussed in the previous action, and that's a public process that goes forward. So if anyone wanted to change the zoning or anything like that, it would have to come back through the city and get approval. I will say that even though it's zoned single-family 1 acre, the topography of the site is very undulating and steep in some areas, flat in some areas, and it would be very challenging to develop with that proposed density. So I think it would be very unlikely that you could develop it to the surrounding density. It would have to be larger parcel sizes should they want to pursue it. It's also the former site of a landfill. So this is the biggest concern. It could be a potential liability to the city keeping these lands because of the landfill location. There wasn't, to our knowledge, a thorough environmental investigation or NEPA conducted on these parcels before they came to the city. So there is that potential risk by having that under city ownership. yours?
And excuse me, actually, I'll just back up for a minute on these ones on Bennett. There is also a municipal well site on the northeast parcel, but it's down in the southeast corner. And so again, the city would reserve that easement for that well site. The next parcel that we are showing you is at the very north end of Gonai. This particular parcel is approximately 39 acres, and it is currently owned by BLM. The city's interest in really, it's primarily Public Works' interest in this parcel is for some flood mitigation and retention. I know you guys are intimately aware with the flood events that occurred in January and February of 2017. There was a lot of impact in this area because of those flows. So by acquiring this piece of property, it would give the city the opportunity to do some work on the parcel to help, whether it be a larger project in the future that could do some detention or retention, or just simply grading and being able to effectuate where those flood flows go. So that's the primary desire for this parcel. Likewise, the next parcel, which is actually it is north of Bonanza, and kind of Conestoga Drive breaks up there. This is a larger area of approximately 180 acres that is currently under BLM ownership. The reason for this is the same as the previous, and that is there's a lot of flood flows that come off of the hillside there, and it would give the city an opportunity to go in there and do some grading, to do some mitigation on those properties, and so we would be interested in acquiring that from BLM. This next parcel is just south of Appian and east of Hillview. It's west of the new I-580, and it was actually bisected by the freeway. So initially it was part of the overall Pete Livermore sports complex, and so it was bisected. But it has always been designated for a future school site. Currently, it is under city's ownership, and what we're proposing with the technical map correction is to remove that reversionary interest. And really, our primary reason for this is just kind of some forward thinking, in the sense that we absolutely plan to preserve it for this future school site, but if it's determined at some point in the future that that's not the right location for the school site, it gives the opportunity for that parcel to be disposed of. Currently, we couldn't do that. If it was determined 10 years from now that that site was not appropriate for a school, then it would stay in city ownership. And the complications with that are just the fact that, it's bisected from the rest of the park. It's not easy to maintain and manage. And so what we are proposing, though, is that if it's not a viable school site, the funds from the disposal will go back into that Carson City special account that we defined earlier in the presentation, so that it can be utilized for other environmentally sensitive lands, or sensitive lands that we so choose to do. And we can't do that currently with the reversionary interest. The final parcel that we have before you is just west of Pinion Hills Drive. It's 3.25 acres that is currently under ownership with Carson City, and it's bound to the north and the south by private residential parcels. We're recommending at this point that this parcel be disposed of, and the reason for that is it has very steep slopes, and so it's difficult to access, but it's also difficult to maintain. It doesn't actually provide an access for people to go down and enjoy the river. There's other areas through which they can do that. But the problem is that it does have some difficulty in maintaining it because of the steep slopes. There's actually no legal access to it because of that. And so currently, the adjacent property owners have been very cooperative and willing to allow the city to traverse through their property to get onto it to maintain it. But they actually have expressed interest in purchasing it, and they are currently doing a lot of the maintenance themselves. By what we described as disposal previously, it would go to a public auction, but it would give them the opportunity to bid on and purchase the parcel. Because of the topography, we don't think that it's really developable, so the best use would probably be the adjacent property owners. The last part of our proposed technical corrections really have to do with some text changes, and so we just kind of wanted to run through there. There's 4 primary text changes that we are proposing. The first one has to do with disposal of BLM properties. In the current lands bill, there is a discussion about properties that were designated, and there's several of them throughout the city that were designated for disposal, that the BLM is asking for the city's recommendation for those to go forward. And, we've had requests in the past for people who are interested in these parcels. We've spent a lot of staff time and resources on it, and our recommendation really is, at this point, is we'd like to be removed from that process, and if it's a property BLM feels that warrants disposal, it's not based on recommendation from the city. I guess from a property owner perspective, we don't want them telling us what to do with our property, and likewise, if it's something they can't manage and maintain, we feel they should have the ability to do that. So it's just kind of a technical correction we're asking to be modified to just remove the city out of that. The second item has to do with the disposal of those proceeds. So we talked a bit about the Carson City special account. What we're asking for to be changed is we'd like the proceeds to be deposited in a special account, but we'd like it to be also available to Carson City and not just the Secretary of the Bureau of Land Management. And so we're looking at how we can draft some language that will allow for specific terms and that process to be determined through a memorandum of understanding with the local BLM office. So the legislation will have the general term that we will be allowed to use it, and we will determine how that's going to happen through a memorandum of understanding with the Bureau of Land Management local office. But then we also want to extend the ability for what it can be used for. And so some of the things that we're considering that we'd like to have included is wildlife conservation and restoration projects, fuels reduction and wildfire prevention, acquisition of environmentally sensitive lands, wilderness protection, which could include fencing, signage, and enforcement, capital improvements, and other educational purposes. So it will broadly expand what the proceeds of those sales can be used for, and we think that would be a big benefit to the city. We also, in the text changes, have asked for removal of reversionary interest for many of the parcels that surround the Eagle Valley Golf Course and Centennial Park and the Trap and Skeet parcel. And the reason for that is again, that definition of reversionary interest and who we're allowed to have on it as a third-party use just makes it difficult for the city often to set up those agreements, and we don't want to risk an issue with something reverting back to BLM when there wasn't an intention for that. So it will just help clarify that, and that's why we're proposing the changes to that. And then our final text changes for a lot of those parcels that we received previously through the lands bill and that new one on Sierra Vista Lane, we're asking to modify. There's a section in there that talks about exceptions to use, and we'd like to include the option for future municipal well site. And really, the reality of it is, there's probably only the need for one well site over there along the river in the future, but we'd like the opportunity to be able to test on the different parcels to find out where that best location is. And currently, under the restrictions, we can't do so. So that is our last text change.
Thank you, Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. I just wanted to add one point. So the Kuntz parcels, the Bennett parcels, the one parcel along the river, should those be disposed of, all of the proceeds, whether it's BLM or even the school parcel, let's say in 20 years they say they don't want it or need it, those would all go back to the Carson City special account. So that's in the geographic area of Carson City. So that way Carson City would benefit from those parcels. And if there's lands that are identified that maybe the city can't purchase, that fund could be accessed for that. And then we would figure out the roles and responsibilities and the procedures through that memorandum of understanding. So I just want to be clear that any of the disposals would benefit and go back to that Carson City special account.
All right, right, are there any questions or comments from the members of Open Space or Parks and Rec? Please.
I have let's see, parcel number 5. There's a lot of OHV activity at the north end of that parcel and dumping. Would our takeover of that improve that situation?
Thank you, Commissioner. Are you talking about the Kuntz parcels?
No, parcel number 5.
Parcel 5. Oh,
Go
bill
on.
reference 5? Okay. I'll let Stephanie answer that one.
With, with it coming into ownership of the city, then those would be things we would certainly, be able to consider. Currently, we know that those properties, even though they're under the Bureau of Land Management's ownership, they have difficulty doing enforcement as well. I mean, we could likely be in that situation, but at least we'd have a little bit more control over it. And we'd also be looking at, ways that we'd be improving the property for the flood mitigation. So we'd certainly want to protect and preserve any improvements that we place on the property.
All right, and also on number 6, again, the same problem up there, a lot of OHV activity, a lot of dumping, and also in the description, it says GONI goes through that parcel.
We can make a correction to that it says that GONI goes through there. I think the answer's the same, is that those maintenance responsibilities would become the city's, and I know we've had some discussions about, whether it's trash or wildland fire mitigation or those sorts of things, that those provisions through Public Works Department would need to occur. It's difficult to enforce off-road, but again, if there are improvements that we are putting in for flood mitigation, those are going to be the things, I think, primarily that we would be protecting.
Yeah, on 5 and 6 in particular, I just want to be clear that the intent is not to have that come for maintenance by open space. Is that correct?
That is correct. If it's not going to be utilized for open space, I have already had discussions within Public Works that we would be able to put aside the funding for the maintenance of those properties. We already coordinate on some other properties that we have that are not open space, but they're for utilities, and work with NDF and the fire department as far as fire mitigation and other maintenance responsibilities that we would do within the department.
Commissioner Bagwell?
Thank you. So my question's on number 7, which deals with the school district, because currently that is reserved for a potential school site. And I know we also have language to be able to change the money if we were to dispose of a parcel, but what if we only get half of it? What if they remove the clause but don't add the education use of dollars? Because I want to make sure that the objective would be to potentially dispose of this parcel and let them put the school in a more beneficial site. That's our intention, right? So what are you going to do if only half of the action happens? You're hoping for 100%.
Well, it's really not thank you, Supervisor Bagwell, Jennifer Bedge, Parks and Recreation Director. It's really not a very large site, so I'm hoping it's big enough for them to even do what their intent might be for a school, because they usually need 10 to 15 acres, at minimum, to really be able to build something, and if you have to expand further, you kind of have to think 2 steps ahead. Should they only need a part of the site and then the rest of it being disposed of, that probably is unlikely, but there is a member of the school district here that could maybe ask, if that size of the site, it seems like something that they might be able to pursue or not. But if we sold, I think it'd be the whole parcel. I don't know if we could.
That's not the
dissect
part I'm
that.
concerned about. I'm concerned we sell it, it goes into the special account, and I can't get the money out to the school district so they can select a more appropriate site. I mean, that's the whole objective.
So if we're going to access the money without it going into the Carson City special account, we would have to pay fair market value for that land back to the federal government. So it either goes back to the special account for citizens, but we haven't purchased that land from the federal government. We got it through a lands bill at no cost. So if we were going to do what you're saying, we'd have to actually pay for the fair market value of that land. The city would, or someone would have to purchase that. Does that answer your question?
So then why in the text language are we adding education purposes? Does that give us just a broader, I'm trying to tie in the two concepts because you've asked us to recommend changing the actual text for the reversionary clause and what the account can be used for, and we're adding education.
Sure.
Unless I'm missing it.
If it's right now, if it's under a Recreation and Public Purpose Act, a school is already an allowable use. For educational purposes, there was a lot of discussion among staff and other feedback from the community about opportunities for like interpretation and more environmental education, but it's very broad at this point. I mean, we're not tied to any specific language. So if there's an opportunity to be more creative or have other opportunities, we're open to that. But I think there's other opportunities through BLM land that already allow for school use. So that typically would be through recreation and public purposes.
Answer your question? Okay. Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Cartwright, and then
My question's on the same parcel, and I think I heard mentioned that we're going to determine the viability if it's good for a school, but I wasn't clear on the timeline for that. I heard like 5, 10, or 20 years. So how long does the school district have to determine if that's a viable site or not?
Well, right now Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. Right now it's already owned by the city and it's identified for a school site. Currently, we don't have an agreement with the school for this particular parcel. Should this all go through, and we've already met with the school district, they've expressed their interest for the site, but they did say they still need to figure everything out. What is the timing for them, whether it's funding, does the site work, will it work in that neighborhood? There's traffic considerations, there's a lot of planning and zoning issues as well. So let's say they want to go forward with it. The city would most likely consider doing an agreement, whether a lease or some other type of document with the school district. So then maybe they would be responsible for operation and maintenance of the existing site and hold on to it. And then if they ever build anything, it would go through the normal city processes. If they determine that and the agreement would determine that time frame that the Board of Supervisors would have to approve. So let's say the agreement goes through and they determine that it's not a viable site, it would probably come back, to the board for direction. We want to dispose of it, it's a surplus property, or the city has another use for that site that maybe we didn't anticipate.
I had some questions about parcels, the numbers 5 and 6 under consideration. Those were two areas that I recall vaguely. I tried to find my notes. But back in 2005 and 2006, when this process was initially going on, I recall the BLM was not amenable to giving away any of the properties on our northern border. And I just wonder how has that changed?
Thank you. For the record, Stephanie Hicks. I'm not aware of the situation that you've described about them not being willing in 2005 and 2006, but I can tell you when we met with them just in August, they expressed their support of it. So there was no opposition to what we were proposing for it whatsoever.
And then back at that time, we were also going through a great deal of community input, asking for all of the neighbors that were involved in the transfer of the property to come forward and talk with us about what was needed. Is this going to be the only opportunity that our neighbors and residents have to bring forth their thoughts and ideas on this transfer?
So we do have a slide on our next step, so we just wanted to bring that up as we discuss this. So as I said, this transpired really quickly, and we are glad that we had the opportunity to bring the joint committee together. What we will be doing next, that will be that next opportunity, is taking the item to the Board of Supervisors, and we tentatively have that scheduled for November 15th. And that will give another opportunity for public comment on it. We are asking this evening, the purpose of tonight is to gather feedback from the committee as well as the public so that we can bring that forward to the board, and then also have an opportunity to circle back with the Bureau of Land Management on anything that has, changed or been modified since we last met with them. And again, tentatively, we hope to be at the board on November 15th, but we do want to take the opportunity to hear the input of the public.
Just as a little further comment on that, it was actually on the Board of Supervisors agenda, and I did remove it and refer it to this committee just to provide the public a nighttime meeting. So often at the Board of Supervisors level, people get upset saying, we can't attend, so we tend to have these meetings at night. So I wanted to make sure that all of the residents in the community had an opportunity to comment at whichever time is appropriate for you. So this will be a nighttime meeting, and then they can come back during the day if we've missed anyone on the November 15th board.
If people want to provide written response that are unable to attend, how do they direct their topic?
To Jennifer.
To Stephanie.
Yeah. Or
Thank
don't
you.
worry, me.
Public comments can either come to Stephanie Hicks, Property Manager, or Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. We'll make sure it's part of the packet for the board. We already have gathered some information, and we'll be sure to, from the public that couldn't attend tonight, some are here as well. I also want to point out, too, because this has happened so fast, and it really has, you saw the timeline, it kind of hit us like a freight train, and we want to make sure everything's accurate and correct. So if there's anything in the packet that we've provided that may not be completely transparent or accurate, we want to take the time to make sure that those are correct and accurate statements. So please feel free to give us suggestions and any information as you look at that, and that goes to the public as well. We want to make sure it's accurate. So if there's something that's not quite right, we'll take that out. We'll make that all 100% correct.
Go ahead.
Just a comment about, I'm curious about the, I guess the regulatory red tape that we have to jump through to get all this in place in such a short amount of time. In particular, do you guys know the city's obligation for Section 106 compliance for the parcels to be transferred, both acquisition and disposal?
As far as, thank you, Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. As far as the Silver Saddle parcels go, I actually think they might have already been completed. As far as the disposal properties, that would be the responsibility of the Bureau of Land Management and under their NEPA process. Is that what you're?
Thanks, that was it.
Go ahead.
And so then I would like to discuss parcel 4, because I think that's what most of the residents, or most of the people in the room are here for. And so I'd just like a little clarity for myself on this one. The way I'm reading the packet, and so I just would like, for the record, so everyone is aware, is we're putting it back the way we had it in the first place. We're not changing any zoning, any recommendations, we're just reversing the action. They gave it to us, we want to give it back. But we're not changing anything else that the residents knew of when they bought their land 20 years ago or whatever. I just need to clarify.
That's correct.
Okay. Because I know that that's what I've gotten the most emails and questions on, and so I just wanted to make sure it was residential before, it would remain residential. And it's up to BLM whether it actually even could be disposed of. just because we revert it back to BLM doesn't mean miraculously it goes up for sale
No.
the day after.
Thank you, Supervisor Bagwell. Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. That's all accurate statements. Currently, it is zoned single-family 1 acre, but it's basically to remove the maintenance responsibility from the city. We're technically responsible for all the defensible space in there around those homes. There's a former landfill site that could be a potential liability to the city. There's been no environmental studies that we're aware of that landfill site or the impacts to that land. So it's basically to remove that responsibility and give that back to the Bureau of Land Management.
Then I also wanted to make sure, I didn't see that we had this parcel ever in our master plan for a park or open space. So I'm not sure why we acquired it in the first place, because it was never in our plan. I looked up everything on open space, I looked up everything on Parks and Rec, and I couldn't see that the parcel was
It's not in the open space
Okay,
plan
I
nor
just
the
wanted to make
Parks and
sure.
Recreation
I'm
master
like, how
plan.
did we get this? Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the commissioners? If not, I'll open it up to public comment, and the vice chair here had an excellent suggestion. Would you care to present it?
I was just going to suggest, so that we can make sure that we capture fairly efficiently and effectively all your comments, maybe we would go from parcel 1 through those, so people who have comments as they come up, we could get them all for a particular item. So maybe if with the PowerPoint, if we could start with number 1, and then we could move through. And then, of course, after we've done that, if people have general comments or other issues, feel free to bring those up too. But this way, we don't have confusion as to which parcel people are referring to.
All right, so anybody who would like to comment on parcel 1, please come on to the table. Please make sure to sign your name on the sign-up sheet. Print. Thank you. Is there any comments on parcel 1?
So just for clarification, this parcel 1 is the parcel at Silver Saddle Ranch, on the east side of Silver Saddle Ranch, with Sierra Vista Lane going through it.
My name is Michael Bish. I'm the secretary of the Friends of Silver Saddle Ranch. And I just wanted to check and see if this is being added into the city as part of Silver Saddle and East Silver Saddle. Does that put it into the revisionary interest?
Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director, this would be added to East Silver Saddle Ranch. So it's something that we're basically maintaining right now and BLM is not, and it would be added to the city's inventory and be considered as part of East Silver Saddle Ranch.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments on parcel 1? If not, let's move to parcel 2. Are there any comments on parcel 2? Come on down.
Parcel 2 are the 4 parcels at the end of the airport runway and also include Cinder Light operation off of Arrowhead.
Welcome. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, Tracy Shane, property owner on Ruby Lane. And in the packet that I saw on the agenda for the board meeting, there's reference to a lot of OHV use and dumping on parcel 2 and then parcels 35 and 36. And there's negligible use of parcel 2 at all in that area. No OHV use, there's no roads, no one dumps, no one's using that area at all. So I just wanted to provide clarification on that. I also wanted to more properly understand what the reversionary interest would be, because the proposal is that the Carson City Airport Authority would then become the manager of the site. But it is also made clear in parcel 3 that this would be also in the packet provided for future economic development opportunities. And I'm trying to understand, beyond the mill sites, what other future economic development opportunities is the city looking at for these parcels? And before we support a change in ownership from parks, because this was BLM for all the people who purchased land in this area, and then it was parks. It was not slated for any economic development uses. So I'm trying to understand, other than that, how would we have some kind of reassurance that if we were to go through removing the reversionary interest, that this would not be economically developed, other than the mill sites?
Thank you, Jennifer Budge. Those are great questions. So first of all, the intent of removing the reversionary interest on these four parcels is solely for the third-party uses. We just got all the information from Sender Light about the location of their mill sites and where everything is, and there basically is no economic development opportunities other than that operation. Removing the reversionary interest is solely so we can do in a third-party agreement with the airport. The current arrangement is, even though an airport authority can hold land, that's not the current arrangement with the city. So the city is typically the owner of the land, and then through a written agreement, typically a lease, then the airport authority becomes the manager of those lands. So that's going to be the only intent. There would be nothing developed or done with that, because those mill sites really encumber the whole story. And even though they're only operating on a portion of their mill sites, they will continue to expand in the future. So we can't and we don't want to, prohibit their activities.
Another question for you. On the parcels south of Arrowhead, 35 and 36, there is considerable OHV use and dumping that occurs in that area. And if the airport authority were to have this third-party agreement to be operating that area, what would they be doing differently than Parks and Rec is now to prevent the use of illegal dumping and illegal OHV use in that area? Because they do cruise around up and down Arrowhead illegally and on my street frequently, and they're not street legal vehicles, so.
Thank you. Again, Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. So when we put those descriptions, it's hard to capture for all four. So really, those two southern parcels, you're correct, are just actively used by off-highway vehicles, if anyone wants to know what OHV is. And the airport is actually the one that cleans it up right now. And we have very limited resources. We have more than 8,000 acres that we manage as a department. We have 2 park rangers and 8 maintenance staff. So it's a lot to take care of. It is an active concern. If the airport would be the manager of that, they would be responsible for the cleanup and regular mitigation of that situation. Whether they want to put in fences or have a proposal, we haven't gotten to that level of detail, but there is a member from the airport here today, and I'm sure she could provide comment on what their intent might be and how they can manage that.
Thanks. I think that would help answer a lot of my questions regarding these parcels. Thank you.
Thank you.
Speak on number 2, don't you? All right.
Thank you. My name is Linda Law. I'm the current chairman of the Carson City Airport Authority. So far as the proposal is concerned, the Airport Authority, I can't speak for them entirely because we haven't put this on our agenda, but I do believe that we would support these changes. As far as the access to that property, historically, the parcel that we own across that is adjacent to this on the west side of Gonai Road, we have on occasion taken our members, our tenants, and our staff and done cleanups and gone to the dump and that sort of thing in order to maintain that property. And I believe we would do a similar cleanup type situation with the 2 parcels on the south side of Arrowhead. I agree with the former speaker that the north side of the 2 parcels on the north side don't receive near the activity or the dumping and that sort of thing, so I'm not sure that would really affect us. Our main concern, of course, is that with the realignment of our airport runway some years ago, back in 2006, that we want to ensure that the safety of our neighbor, our communities, our neighbors, is protected, and that would be an excellent area for anything like an airport, like an airplane engine out on takeoff. They would have some space to go. It may not be optimal for a landing spot, but it's a whole lot better than houses and so forth. So that's why we are encouraging this activity with this piece of property. We are well aware of Cinder Light's interest in these pieces of property. We have no intention at this point in time of ever asking for commercial use for those properties. It is strictly a safety issue for us. Any questions? I'd be happy to entertain. Thank you very much.
Just thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your input.
Oh,
Marjorie?
It takes me a while to decide what I want to ask. On the other end of the airport, on the south
Yes.
side of the airport, you have really good fencing and locks and such, way beyond the runway itself. Is there any consideration for doing that on this section that's west of Gonai Road?
the difficulty with that is all of the fencing, in fact, we have a new fencing project coming up in our CIP to improve the north and east area, over a mile of fencing that's going to be put in, 6-foot fencing with deer wiring and all that sort of thing. The difficulty with the property on the west side of Gonai is the fact that we have talked to the FAA before about sharing the cost of that, and that's not on their game plan as of now. I mean, it could be that in future monies will come available. There was a considerable amount of money that became available this year, but Carson City was not one of the chosen airports for that, but that doesn't mean it couldn't happen in the future. Just right now, there's no money available for it that would come out, that would lend itself to a cost share situation. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
And thank you for offering us the chance to comment on this.
Our
And
pleasure.
our airport manager, Ken Moen, planned to be here tonight, but he went through spinal surgery on Saturday, so I got the ticket to come. And I thank you.
Well, we wish him a speedy recovery. Anybody else want to comment on parcel 2? All right, let's move on to parcel 3. Are there any comments on parcel 3?
Parcel 3 is the 6 parcels on the west side of Prison Hill adjacent to Edmonds Drive.
All right, hearing none, we're going. Let's go on to number 4. Is there anybody? Come on down.
Parcel number 4 is the 4 parcels on Bennett and Gentry.
Yes.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members. My name is Doug Martin. My wife and I live adjacent to these 4 parcels, and actually the 2 northern ones. And I found out about this about 5 days before a pending Board of Supervisors meeting. Thank you, Supervisor Bagwell, for pulling that. The interesting thing about this is the status of this land for the time that we have lived there up until 4 years ago was BLM land. And it did not have, as far as I know, a bullseye on it saying dispose of this land. And this action that we're proposing tonight would return that to them with a request to dispose of it. Now, I know all about resource management plans and what the federal government does, and I know that BLM does not like to own little islands inside of residential areas, and so ultimately perhaps BLM would have said, let's dispose of this land because it doesn't meet our connectivity activity, and that's important to BLM. So I don't want to take too much of your time, and thank you for not instigating a 3-minute criteria.
I forgot something.
You did, but I'll try to be quick and articulate. First of all, my wife and I provided you a copy of the memo that we sent to the Board of Supervisors regarding this issue. I don't want to read the whole thing, but I do want to point out that my wife and I are 46-year residents of Carson City. I have been working in the area of natural resources and the environment in Carson City and around Carson City for that entire period, including being a consultant to Carson City. And if you like your landfill, you can say, thank you, Doug. And if you don't like it, I have nothing that I ever did with your landfill. So I do have a background in landfills, and I am aware that there is a landfill there, but the landfill that there is old and historic. And if it was a concern, it should have been addressed and thought about before a Carson City drinking water well was put on that property. So when we say that we have a major concern about a landfill, I think we're talking historic, open, burning type landfills that is from the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and not the type of thing associated with environmental, industrial, hazardous waste criteria that happened in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. So that's important to remember. But I do want to go back to the letter that we sent to the mayor and the Board of Supervisors. And I want to point out that my wife and I are 46-year residents of Carson City. We live at 5000 Gentry Lane. We oppose the adoption of the Board of Supervisors resolution as written and the proposed technical corrections as they refer to item number 4, which includes parcels 010-252-02 and 010-251-02 for residential development. We request that these parcels be retained as Carson City open space. When we purchased our homes, these lands were BLM open space, and this feature was important to us. Residential development would negatively impact our property values, we feel, and the environmental habitat, beauty, and tranquility of the area as well. When these parcels were transferred to the city several years ago, I contacted the city and expressed the concern about wanting to retain them, and I was told that we would retain them, and that's what happened. And actually, the patent that occurred and the deed does have a condition in it that says, as a condition of the conveyance of the lands described in paragraph 2B11, the Secretary, in consultation with Carson City and affected local interests, shall reserve a perpetual conservation easement to the land to protect, preserve, and enhance the conservation values of the land consistent with paragraph 4B. So when they were researched, the city took them with the intent to retain them as open space. And so what I'm asking for is to continue. Going back to our memo, your report regarding these particular parcels cites several reasons to dispose of the parcels, which a couple of them, in our observations, are inaccurate. Having lived there for 28 years, that's where I'm coming from. And I'm speaking specifically of the 2 northern parcels because I don't live adjacent to the 2 southern ones. But on those 2 northern parcels, you cite illegal dumping and excessive or off-road vehicle use on those parcels. And I'm here to tell you that those activities are not occurring on those 2 parcels that I'm aware of. And I'm retired now, so I look at those parcels quite a bit and walk in them. We also understand that they were historic dumps. I've already gone through that. And another thing that is challenging for this parcel is the fact that the city has a drinking water supply well that I've looked at the well logs on it, and I believe that the static water level when it was drilled, water is approximately 180 feet below the surface. When you turn on those 700 gallon per minute pumps, it'll drop approximately 200 feet in a 7-hour drawdown, and that it is a significant contributor to our drinking water system in the city. I did contact the Safe Drinking Water Program in the state of Nevada, and they did provide me with a 2-year capture zone for that parcel, and that 2-year capture zone is approximately 1,200 feet in a circle. So if you put a 1,200-foot circle around that parcel, around that well, and the well, as we all know, is in the northeast parcel in the southeast corner of that parcel. So if you put a circle around that, you're basically looking into my backyard. So the point I'm making about that is the fact that I want to go to the open space criteria. And I know there's several qualities that this parcel does not have that open space would look at. There's 12 criteria that you have, and of the 12, though, 6 of them do pertain to retaining this parcel. And I'll go through those really quickly. Under your open space master plan, the extent to which property possesses qualities that will meet the purpose of open space include the following. The first is wildlife habitat, provide valuable habitat and migration corridors. I'm here to tell you that mule deer use that property. They jump the fence and enjoy my garden at their leisure. There are a lot of coyotes that use that, and they do help control and keep in check my ground squirrel infestation that also enjoys feeding on my garden. So I'm here to tell you that there are wildlife habitat qualities to that. The next one is natural areas. It is a natural area. It is provides a lot of tranquility, and it does provide a lot of natural area qualities. Visibility. It is visible from all of the people who surround it. It's important to all of us, and I think you'll hear from some more about how important that is. It does have a lot of topography variety and visual interest. Staff has already pointed out the undulating features to it and the challenges to development. And then moving down, accessibility, no, it's not accessible to the public. It would be hard to connect that to the trails up above on Prison Hill. But getting down to the next one, historic and cultural resources. There are significant cultural resources in that area, including some of the old landfill materials that are in there. I was the project manager for the development of several landfills in the state of Nevada. The largest landfill in the state of Nevada was the Apex landfill in Las Vegas. One of the things that held up that construction was the fact that there was a hobo camp adjacent to that landfill. And so it took us a while to mitigate that so that it could be transferred from public ownership into the private hands. I also worked on the City of Fallon's landfill, and one of the things that stopped the location that we proposed was the fact that it was situated on the I.C. Russell Spit, and anybody who knows surveying might know the name I.C. Russell because he's the gentleman who in the 1870s he mapped all of the high water level of the ancient Lake Lahontan. So cultural resources are not just in the landfill. I understand trails that went through there during the immigrant trails, and there's also Indian artifacts in that particular area. Now, getting to the most important one that I feel under your own criteria, Open Space Committee, is health, safety, and welfare. That one of the qualities, does it protect possible water supplies, avoid flood hazards, and improve air quality? Well, I don't know how it improves air quality, but I'm here to tell you that you do have a well. It does have a wellhead protection program around it. Those are very porous soils, and it's got a 1,200-foot capture zone in the 2-year zone. I also did a study back in the 1990s for the city regarding nitrate contamination in southeast Carson City. And one of the things that we documented and we found is that the construction of septic tanks and leach fields in South Carson have become abbreviated, and by that I mean they have been shortened. It typically is multiple, up to 4 leach lines is a typical leach field system. In Carson City, in the south portion, that has gotten, it had gotten to be truncated to just 1 leach line, and in some cases, less than 50 feet in length. And there was really, at that time we did that study, very limited or no failures of those systems. So when you have no failures of a system in a very short leach field, what does that tell you about the permeability of those soils? They're very permeable, and so materials flow through them quickly. So you have an opportunity, open space people, to contain and retain that as open space to protect health, safety, and welfare. The other things in your own master plan that I'd like to point out why this makes a great open space is, can the property be acquired relatively easily? Well, the answer to that one is yes, because it's already public land. So we don't have to acquire it. And then, is there community support for conserving the parcel as open space? I think when you hear from many of the people behind me tonight, you will see that there is, I think, community support for conserving the parcel as open space. And then the last one, and I've heard this brought up several times, does the parcel present any unusual maintenance or development costs? Well, we've cited the fact that there is an old landfill there, but does that old landfill really represent a unusual maintenance or development cost? I don't think so, and I think I'm basing it upon 28 years of living there and having BLM never do any maintenance on the parcels right behind me. So I think if you took the BLM model, your maintenance costs might be minimal for the next 28 years. So I appreciate the process that we're going through tonight, and I think you can take it to the Board of Supervisors. You could return it to the BLM with a recommendation to dispose of it. Or you could take the action to retain it as open space, and we, the neighbors surrounding it, and we, the community, won't need to worry about that federal process and go through it. And it's an item, and it's a piece of property that's already in open space, and all I'm asking for you to do is retain it as open space. So I know I wasn't on a 3-minute time clock, and I know I took more than 3, and I appreciate it, but I will say, are there any questions?
Jennifer.
Thanks. Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. I just want to make 2 clarifications. One is the conservation easement that's referred to in that Oplama document from the federal lands bill is referring to referring to Silver Saddle Ranch. So there's actually not a conservation easement on these 4 parcels. It's a long document, and it shoves all of the lands, the 6,000 acres that we received from BLM in that document. So it's actually not these 4 parcels it's referring to.
Then may I ask a question regarding that?
Sure.
And that is, does the city have the ability to dispose of that parcel? These 4 parcels. Parcel 4.
The 4 parcels?
Right, the way the land...
If it takes the action, and could go back to BLM if the board chooses to do so.
But could the city, if it retains in city property...
No, we don't have the reversionary interest,
Right.
So we can't dispose of it.
Right, so
And we're not making
it cannot
that
be
request.
disposed of if it's in city ownership.
Correct.
Correct, okay.
Yes.
Whether it's a conservation
If we did
easement or another clause, the city
Yeah.
has to retain it.
Correct. But
Okay.
it doesn't have a conservation. I just wanted to be clear
Okay,
on that.
all right.
Yes.
But the intent is the same?
Yes.
Okay.
And then I also wanted to clarify that this is not currently on the open space inventory, not really considered as such or managed by the Open Space Division. So if there's maintenance needs or defensible space, it's from the Parks Division. And I know that the public doesn't really care who takes care of it as long as it's taken care of. But I just wanted to clarify for the board who's actually sort of overseeing and managing that.
So, in general, my questions really go backwards to say, before I'm going to take property, purchase it from someone, put it into open space, we really do go through an exercise. And so I'm more interested in, and that's really why I asked the questions originally, I'm not seeing why we ever took the property, because it doesn't meet the requirements that either the Park and Rec Board nor the open space would have exercised to protect that property. And so I'm not arguing with what you want to do living in the community there, but I'm just trying to be honest with you. They're not parcels that these boards would have recommended to be purchased. So when I look at the well, and that would be the only component piece you would look at to say, do we need to protect a watershed? If this reverts, we are still going to be able to protect the watershed, because that is the important component that we're all talking about. So we retain the easement for the well, and I need to make sure.
Yes, for the record, Stephanie Hicks, Real Property Manager. That's the intent of the city, is to retain the easement for the well.
Was the original document executed with BLM to put that well in?
Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. So it's our belief, I mean, it was well before 2014 that the well was put in. So there was, probably some sort of permissions or documents to be able to construct and do that well. And as far as the due diligence to put that well in, we'd have to do some research to find out what was done for that. Because I think it's been there a pretty significant amount of time.
Well, since then, and this is much more recent, the city had a consultant develop a wellhead protection plan. What was their specific recommendation regarding that well?
Stephanie Hicks, Real Property Manager. I apologize, but it's not my area of expertise, so I don't know the answer to that, but I can research it and find it out for you.
Joanne, did you have a question?
I was just curious what the size of the easement is that the well sits on.
Stephanie, do you know that?
No, I don't. I recall 100 by 100 is what we were thinking would be adequate, but I would be air to say that is for sure. We would need to determine that, and that would be something that would be in the reservation with BLM, just as if we were going to obtain a brand new easement on a different piece of property. We'd have to define those areas.
Jeremy?
Sir, I'd like to commend you on the immense amount of research that you conducted for your talk. I learned a lot. I didn't know that there was a landfill, other than reading that in my packet. So just a couple of follow-ups, not really a question or anything. Maybe there's one in there. You mentioned that there's a landfill, and you thought maybe it was from the 20s. First, do you have any information about this landfill? Because you say, you mentioned significant cultural resources. As a cultural resource specialist, I've recorded a lot of landfills, and very rarely are they considered National Register eligible. And that's the process that BLM would have to go through NEPA to evaluate this resource to determine whether it was significant or not. The one example of a landfill that does have components that are they're considered contributing elements to its eligibility, or is in Tonopah, the huge landfill that's outside of Tonopah. But beyond that, the size of this landfill, depending on what's in it, I would I would lean towards it being not eligible, but I don't know anything about it. If you can produce any information about this, and the BLM would need to go through this process as well, that would help in that determination and to help bolster your argument for significant cultural resources.
Well, I appreciate that, and let's clear the error. The Resource Conservation and Recovery Act was passed in 1986, and that created a requirement that we go from open dumps to landfills. So I used the wrong term technically, and the right term is open dump. So as you're aware, the Tonopah landfill was actually a dump. So let's just call a dump a dump. And in terms of your criteria, it doesn't identify that for it to be historic cultural resource, that it has to be eligible for national registration. I just was pointing out that one of the factors that would make it so that open space could consider it is the cultural resources there that go beyond it being a dump. So thank you for pointing that out and clarifying it. And I don't have any more data on when that dump was operated, only because the only thing that puts it into the older time frame are some of the people that I've talked to. They collect bottles out of that, and the bottles that they're collecting, I believe, are out of the late 1800s, early 1900s. So that puts it as, you know, if you're a cultural specialist, that's how you date when you landfilled it. And as we all know, your treasure trove of bottles is old privies, isn't it? So there you go. And any other clarification I can help you with?
No, that's about it. I think we could gain a little bit more information from this if it was actually depicted on a historic map. Sometimes that's the best place to start. USGS prior to 1950, General Land Office plat maps. That's another good place to start. There's a lot of historic maps available from the Keck Library up in UNR. So whoever if a contractor gets this job, or if it's BLM that does it, that's probably the first place they're going to start.
Well, I understand that, and I'm not suggesting that I go into that study or you go into that study. What I'm suggesting is we have an opportunity so that those studies don't have to be done by BLM by retaining it as open space in Carson City.
Yep, understood.
And anything else, Madam Chair?
Let me just make a comment. Having grown up in Carson, that was the old dump, and I believe they quit using it in the mid-'40s. And Edmonds used to be called Slaughterhouse Road, so you'd take Slaughterhouse Road to the dump. So, just a little bit of trivia. Growing up here.
I just would like to say, you did a lot of research, and that's wonderful, but I do have a concern that this property is not accessible to the public. And, you do say that if we were to keep it as open space, we wouldn't have to manage it, but I am concerned that should incursions start to happen with people getting in there, dumping, trashing, partying.
Taking their metal detectors.
Yeah, hunting, bottles and stuff like that, then you would be expecting us to come in and manage it and take care of it, whether it would be open space or parks. And then we would then have to do something with it, but it still would not be accessible to the public. So we would be managing basically a park for a small group of homes. That would be a concern for us.
Well, I appreciate that, and that's a really great statement, and I'm going to turn it over to my dear friend here. And you bring up a point, though, that I want to clarify, and that it is accessible to the public. The 27 people who live around that are part of the public of Carson City, and it is accessible to us, plus every person who parks along Bennett, which is a public street, has access to it. But that's been that way for the entire 28 years I've lived there, plus more, and we don't have an excess of people going into it. So I appreciate those comments, and I appreciate the city has told me many times we don't want to take on maintenance liabilities, and I just want you to consider this as open space. Thank you.
Commissioner Bagwell?
I think that Donna pretty much covered what I was after, because what's important to me is I really feel it's my job to serve the public, which would include the surrounding property owners, but my bigger concern is you will have an expectation. So I'd love it if each of you could actually tell me you can do the same thing that BLM did for 28 years, which is nothing. Because I just need to be honest with you, Doug, because you're here asking me to say, move this into open space, because currently it's actually not in the open space plan, but we have no resource to take care of it, and I don't ever want to lead the public to a false thought. So even if you're successful tonight and we say, okay, we're going to keep it, we're not going to revert it to BLM, you're still not going to get any service on that property. I mean, it needs to be clear, there's no service.
And I'm not I'm not asking for any.
Right?
Thank you.
You're getting nothing.
Yeah. All right, thank you so much,
Right?
Mr. Martin. All right, would you introduce yourself, sir, and welcome?
Hi, my name is Ralph Thomas. I'm a resident up on Gentry. Ditto. That's kind of hard to follow up with, and I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about this. But I'd also like to mention during the BLM's 2001 Carson City Consolidated RMP, there was a lot of public input on these lands for disposal. You mentioned that, Ms. Evans, and I'm kind of surprised there wasn't more opportunity for public involvement in this decision. Making legislation or technical changes to legislation is problematic. If you get it wrong, it makes a big mess out of things. I retired from BLM. I've got 44 and a half years of federal service. And so I've worked with a lot of administrations, and I've seen a lot of good stuff, and I've seen a lot of boo-boos. And so it concerns me running something like this through the system so fast to get a decision without public input on it. We're not the only public in this town. A lot of us live around some of these parcels. You know, I'm specifically talking about the parcels on the number 4 land plat here. But there's parcels all over town. It makes me nervous when somebody starts talking about changing the reversionary clause in these lands. That's just as easy to change the reversionary clause on Prison Hill or the ranch. It really is, and that makes me a little bit nervous that this can flow through so fast and get a change potentially if this legislation actually passes, which is likelihood it may not, because that's tough with any of these bills. They usually try to run them through one of the National Defense Authorization Acts to get them run through. That's about the only way they can get them run through, but it's problematic not having good public input in this for the whole town and all these parcels that are listed. To me, this looks like it's kind of a workaround to shove some of this stuff back on BLM. And the funding comes back to the Carson City special account. What about the taxpayers of the United States? You know, BLM is a public agency. It works for the United States. And I do not represent BLM. I'm retired. So I question, why does this money need to go back to Carson City when it couldn't go to the general public? You're proposing, to me, more than just some technical changes on this. Technical changes usually mean adjustments in mapping. Some of this is adjustments in mapping and legal descriptions and things like that. That makes sense. To me, this is a little beyond this. This is basically trying to shove a workload off onto BLM, which basically has no funding for this work. They work on cost recovery for their land actions, which means they have to have a proponent come in, make a proposal, come up with the money. These kind of things, there's no money for this. And so if BLM gets this back, it could be decades before they do anything with it. Who knows? You just don't know what the cycle of this kind of stuff is. If Carson City's going to get involved with this and wants to partner with BLM to have them do this kind of work, Carson City should get together with BLM on their MOU and create a proffer account and put up about $85,000 a year so BLM can hire a staff person to do this. That's about what it runs for a GS11 person with benefits and things like that. They need a person in place for land disposals. Right now, I highly suspect they don't have anybody that can focus on this entire project and deal with this easily. Back to this item number 4, in my opinion, it should be kept for open space, whether it ends up back in BLM's hands or Carson City keeps it. It may not be on your master plan, but who makes the changes in the master plan? You're part of the group that makes those changes along with public input. It's probably easier to change that master plan than it is dealing with legislation some days. There's no reason why that couldn't be open space. I happened to walk my little baby burro through that yesterday. And so it does get use from the public. I'm not the only one that wanders around down there. It's open space. I see cars parked down there with people just walking their animals and things like that. If you did a hydro test on that area, I think you'd find that an awful lot of runoff comes down through those streets and off Gentry on its way down to Hudson. And I looked at a house off Ethel. It's the lowest one in the cul-de-sac down there. When I first moved here about 3.5 years ago, I wouldn't have bought that place because all that water comes right down through there. If you build and harden and put a road in there on your transportation system, that costs money to maintain also. Nothing is free. You may get tax revenues for those houses being built in there, but you've got infrastructure that you have to maintain after that. That takes time, that takes money, that takes staffing. And it also changes the hydrological flow of that area. Right now, the sagebrush, you could get 2x4s out of it, it's so big. But the water soaks in there, and a lot of it stays in that area and doesn't flood out Hudson and the homes and stuff below that either. It gives an opportunity for that stuff to settle out in there. There's not a lot of that left that you can control. So my recommendation was to leave that as open space. Change your master plan. You folks are the ones that are in charge of this, along with our supervisors. You can make recommendations for that kind of thing. That's about all I had. Any questions?
Just in general, because you said you used to work for BLM. So if all we're doing is putting it back the way it was, BLM could have disposed of this property and had single-family 1-acre parcels. So tell me what's different today from what we're proposing than BLM could do 4 years ago.
Well, good luck on having it done really fast with BLM.
I don't think any of us are expecting that, to tell you the truth. I think they won't do anything for 28 years.
I can't answer for BLM, but, it's from my position that I held before I retired, this would not be a real high priority.
I absolutely concur with you that they're not going to do anything with it.
They've got lands in Fernley under the 2014 Land Act, I believe. The city can't find any buyers for that. And so this could end up being the same thing. Talk about technical changes. They've got a debacle up in Virginia City that is a big mess up there, and the legislation didn't help that. It actually made it worse. So they're trying to make a legislative change now. Don't know if that'll ever happen or not, but those people can't hold clear title to the properties up there. Not really. They're all under a cloud. So that's why I don't recommend doing legislative changes in a big hurry. It can cause big problems. And I really believe in public input. I think this is not ripe for the members of this community, the citizens in this town, to give input on. I believe in the public process. People need to hear about this. They need to know about it, not in a 1-month time frame. This is kind of big. That's just my opinion.
Well, we like hearing from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Are there any questions or comments from any of the commissioners? Sir, your turn.
Madam Chairman, members, I'm Steve Knight. I'm a geologic engineer, hydraulic engineer, formerly with the State Engineer's Office many years ago. And I'm also a archaeologic researcher and consultant. I do stuff, and I'm on the board of directors with the Oregon California Trails Immigrant Association and past president. I won't redo everything. Mr. Martin is my next door neighbor. I live on corner of Gentry and Bennett, and the well in question is in my southwest corner below my fence, immediately about 15 feet off my property line. I've lived in Carson City since early 70s and moved there just about the same time Mr. Martin did, and we've known each other for 50 years, oddly enough. But anyway, open space is one of the big attractions of Carson City. I mean, period. It doesn't have to be organized playgrounds and such like Livermore Park or Centennial Park or whatever. Open space makes Carson City desirable. I don't want to live in Las Vegas or Phoenix or Reno, Sparks, because I want open space. And we have deer, coyotes, and as Mr. Martin mentioned, we have bobcats, quail by the bucket loads, and people use this area for, when I say recreation, we have more people walking around the block than we have cars, and car traffic, and like everything from burros, Mr. Thomas's burros, to dogs, to whatever else people wander and stuff. And it's fully accessible, totally accessible land. It's not fenced anywhere, really. It is a floodplain area. I mean, during the rains 3 months ago, the water went down there like crazy and was flooding the areas down in, I believe, Hudson Court down the end. And I felt sorry for them. If they ever build anything like that, you'd be dumping so much water on them, it'd be a mess. It is a noted stream bed on maps, and it is a fault zone. That's mapped. Well protection is definitely a priority for the city, so I have no worry about my house and the immediate property for development. But there is on the dumping, it's historical. As I say, I do archaeology, and we find the sanitary soldered cans with the soldered tops, quite old bottles from the 1880s, 1890s, turn of the century. We found sad irons, arrowheads. There's all sorts of archaeological stuff, but it's also adjacent, as you well know. South Edmonds is the immigrant trail for the Carson 1848-1852 Carson Immigrant Trail after the Donner Party tragedy, and these were campsites. When these 250,000 immigrants, tens of thousands of wagons, and hundreds of thousands of oxen and cattle went through there in those years. And they all camped in this area, so there's campsites, and there will be archaeological stuff. That's what our group does. I want to see it stay open, and yes, heavy development would be a detriment to my house values, and nobody wants to live in a huge, downtown Sparks or Phoenix or anything. That's why we live in Carson City. It's a beautiful town, and I intend to live here a long time. I'm retired, that's a few years ago, and Mrs. Bagwell's been a very good friend to myself and my schools and such, and I hope we can keep that as open area. I think our neighbors just would love it. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Any questions for this gentleman?
Okay.
Sir, welcome.
Good evening. My name's Fred Droes. Last name's D-R-O-E-S. And I live at the corner of Conti and Hudson. It's about 1,000 feet south of these parcels. And my property and the homes below me sit in a designated floodplain. We are hoping that the city could mitigate this by constructing detention basin, retention basin, and the ideal spot is these 4 parcels. I see where we're acquiring property to build retention basins, but here we want to give it away. I think that's bad policy. We all, in the floodplain, have to pay flood insurance on our federally backed loans. And the city has spent considerable resources repairing ditches, driveways, trying to reroute the water to prevent erosion. And every time we get a rain, and it does rain on the east side of the town, they're down there with bulldozers and dump trucks picking up the sediment off of Snyder and Edmonds. So I think there is a benefit to the community to keep these parcels. I mean, if we're acquiring it at a Gonai, we should keep what we have.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions?
Probably not for you, more technical than, didn't Public Works, do we have a flood detention zone on this one also?
Stephanie Hicks, real property manager. These particular 4 parcels are not in a mapped flood zone. We did verify that. I did have a conversation also with Rob Fellows, who's our chief stormwater engineer, because a question did come up about whether this would be a site that would be reasonable for a basin in the future. And his recommendation was something further upstream would be much more appropriate than this if the city were going to invest those resources, because it could protect far more homes than just these in the area, that are south because of the way of the flows.
Did he happen to offer up where that might be located?
He did indicate a general area, but I couldn't tell you specifically. And if it had been something we could identify in this, we would have included it.
Sir, you have something to say?
Yeah, I'm a little baffled by that comment that Robin might have made. The flood zone starts 200 or 300 feet above my property. Why do we need to protect the homes further up that aren't in the flood zone?
Right, and you say you have to pay for flood insurance, correct?
Well, I don't, because I own my home. But if you have a federal home loan, then there's a requirement that you have to carry flood insurance for that particular life of the loan.
Any other questions or comments for this gentleman? All right, thank you so much. Appreciate your input, sir.
All right, thank you.
Your turn.
Madam Chairman and members of this board, my name is Wayne Perrock, and I live on the corner of Heidi Circle and Gentry Way. And when all these public hearings we're doing on this, I happened to sit on the Open Space Committee for 4 years. So I was familiar with stuff, and I remember talking to my neighbors that are around there, and what where I felt comfortable with saying, hey, let's move for the city to acquire this, was it because we were going to maintain that view shed. View shed is part of open space. If you look around where we've bought properties, a lot of the times there's no development on it, there's not even trails on it. It's to protect that view around us that encircles this. But from my living room window, I can look down and look at Job's Peak, and here's this uninterrupted plain of sagebrush and just open space. It's not rooftops. And I think that's an important thing to always consider is view shed. That's what open space is really about. It's not really about parks. And a little bit about my background. I have 36 years of park and recreation experience. I was a park ranger. I watched Sand Harbor be developed. And I worked my way through the things, and I retired as the administrator of the state park system. And a lot of the things the city did during my tenure, 6F boundaries and that, I had something to say about it. But I really think you should look at the value of this, not for the city, because it is a good, valuable view shed. And I don't recall it not being on our plan, because people were asking me about it. And I said, well, let's go for the city because it's more protected there. There's no way the city can sell it. And with that, I'll answer any questions you have.
Any questions? Thank you so much. We appreciate your input, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Your turn.
Hi, my name is David Patterson. I live on Gentry Way, or Gentry Lane, sorry. I actually have two things. One of our neighbors was unable to make it due to health reasons, and she typed up a letter and asked me to read it and submit it in for the board. This is from Mrs. Johnson, who's at 4800 Gentry Lane. It's addressed to Open Space Advisory Committee and Parks and Recreation Commission. I am writing the following statement for inclusion in the record meeting with Open Space Advisory Committee and Parks Commission on October 22nd at 5 p.m. We do not agree with the elimination of the open space between Conti and Gentry off of Bennett Avenue for a number of reasons which are delineated below. The land was BLM property when we bought and built our house, and we were told that the land behind us could not be built on because it was BLM property. When the BLM sold the land to Carson City, it was with the provisions that the city retain it as either open space or recreational lands. I expect that agreement to be upheld. Now the city wants to develop the land, which will decrease our property values. The city engineer declared the space to be a flood zone a few years ago, and when someone else had the idea of potential development and could not be built upon. Given the existing topography, I do not see the flood zone designation having changed. The city is constantly screaming about water shortages in Carson City, yet it continues to allow growth to a level far beyond the capacity of the town to provide water. We are already on water restrictions in the summer in this area, so why would we place an additional burden on the existing supply? Our properties were landscaped with the views in mind, specifically not hindering the neighbors' views. As a result, most of us did not plant large trees on all our property. For the sake of privacy, we would want large trees on our back of our property if homes were to go in that close to us. However, there is no time left in our lives to grow such trees, especially since we feel we have been lied to about the future of these lands. Finally, why does Carson City think it can just change property designations after it's been approved for zoning one way? People make investments based on information and existing laws in effect. Then the city comes along and changes its mind. Really, what protections do homeowners in Carson City have when their investment can be lost because of politicians deem it so? Thank you for making my response part of the record. Sincerely, Janet M. Johnson and Clifton K. Johnson. Just as a point of interest on that, the Johnsons actually back up to this open space in the northernmost, their backyard lines up with the northernmost corner of the parcel off of Gentry. Their backyard hits this open space. I've done a lot of work for them. My best friend is friends with them, are his parents. They have a beautiful view. They can sit out on their deck and see that entire back slope of all the sagebrush and all the houses that are off of Conti up on top of that bluff. But they don't have anything between them. They enjoy all the wildlife, the deer, the coyotes, the bobcats. They have fun with the rabbits and everything else there also. So they do appreciate the open space. I did read in some of these comments that on this notice that I got, something about off-highway vehicle usage in the area. There is virtually none on those 4 parcels. They don't go anywhere, so if anybody's riding an off-highway vehicle through those, they're not on those parcels, they're on Bennett. They're going from Conti to Gentry and then out to the south end of Gentry where they can get into the Prison Hill recreation area for the motorcycles. But they don't cut through that sagebrush because those parcels are all landlocked with residential, fenced residents all around them. There are people that walk on those streets every single day. I see them all the time, especially now that I'm retired. And the gentleman was correct. We have as much foot traffic as we have automotive traffic. That space is, the only activity on that space is actually the Carson City Water Department. That is the only vehicle that I ever see on Bennett down there in that area, is when they're servicing the wellhead. That's the only real activity that we ever see there. I have not in 16 years seen a Carson City Parks Department truck having to go in and clean anything up in that on those parcels. So where this dumping, with people doing illegal dumping or off-highway vehicle damage to those lands, there is none. Next point is the source of water that runs through those parcels starts at the top of the hill on Clearview. It runs between the houses on Clearview, down between the homes that are in Heidi Circle, down to these parcels, and then down through Mr. Drove's side yard. So a detention basin in there would be a great asset for the people. The folks on Conti, if you want to go to South Conti and look on the west or the east side of their roadway, right now it is eroded out over a foot deep in areas because the street department can't keep up with the amount of erosion. We get a rain, everybody on the east side of Conti on that south end loses their driveways. We've got folks that have got railroad ties having to bolster up their driveways so they can get their vehicles in and out of their properties because the road's eroding because of all that water. A detention basin on the southern end of those parcels would be a godsend for everybody downstream. And with the percolation of the ground there, that water's going right into the groundwater supply because that dirt in our area is super porous. So I would like to see this Carson City keep these parcels as with what they did with the BLM and leave it alone. It's not going to cost the city anything to maintain this. I mean, the only other infrastructure that's on Bennett through that area is Carson City has a fire hydrant and there's one culvert running under Bennett. And I believe it's a 24-inch culvert and it has concrete head walls on both ends. Is it a 48? So that's the only maintenance that's having to take place on that. And the street department would have to maintain the culvert anyhow. Even if they got rid of the land, they would still have to maintain that culvert. So there's no additional cost to the city. And so I would really like you guys to consider just taking these 4 parcels off the table, leave it the way it is, because there's no cost to the city on this thing. And dig a detention basin on the thing if you want to do that. It would help protect the homeowners downstream. It would help protect our neighbors on Conti. Mr. Drove's neighbor across the street from him had to have huge retaining wall or barrier rails put in to keep the water out of his front yard because there's so much water coming down there. And it's not just coming from there, it's also coming from up Hudson as well. So, I mean, it's coming from a lot of points, but a good portion of it is coming out of that field. So that's all I got. Thanks, guys, very much. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions?
Okay, all right. I just have a comment that I believe that we would not be able to put a retention basin in there based on the open space usage that was given to us by the BLM. So I understand your concerns. I appreciate your thoughts, but I don't think that building anything on it would be allowed.
Commissioner Cartwright?
When did Carson City become the owner of these parcels? What year was that?
2014.
2014? And before that, it was BLM?
Correct.
Okay, I had my years all mixed up on my paper. And then in these, so it's been Carson City open space for 4 years, and then where does the public park, like if I wanted to go over there and walk my dogs, where would I park to do that?
You would have to park on Bennett, yeah, on the road, which unfortunately is narrow. It's barely probably 24 feet wide. So it's a little sketchy off to the shoulders also. They're fairly steep. There's really no public parking in the area. So, but all the residents use it.
You all have spoken very highly of it, so I was looking forward to going to see it.
Okay, thank you. Is that it?
Any other questions?
Sure. This is actually a question for Alan. He's been with Open Space longer than I have. I'm not familiar with these parcels being part of open space. Currently, they are not part of open space.
They're not formally part of the open space program. So we haven't seen anything in any of our meetings. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jen, but it's not something that was formally with capital open space. It's open space, but within the program, it's not.
Open space in the sense that there's nothing developed.
It's undeveloped. So if we didn't actually acquire it as open space, is that what I'm hearing? Is it's not really open space? Mm-hmm. It's just BLM gave it to the city?
BLM gave it to the city. It is undesignated as open space.
Okay, so why couldn't we do the detention basin improvement if it's not open space?
Because the BLM's requirements on use of the land requires that we do not put infrastructure, and retention basin is infrastructure.
Okay.
We can refer to it as a natural area and is certainly valued as a natural area, but it is not a designated open space that our advisory committee has any responsibility over, or the Parks and Open Space group.
Okay. So then I guess our big fear then is if it does go back to the BLM and the BLM does liquidate the property and it turns into a developer, then we're going to be back fighting because they're wanting to put 75 homes on those 4 parcels.
Well, it isn't actually zoned for that either.
It's not, but we've seen zoning changes change left and right. Look at racetrack.
And let me just say, I support you, and I believe that we have better control of it as owning it by Carson City. Giving y'all a hint to my thinking, but we have to be really clear, just like we have to be very clear on anything we take to the BLM and not make mistakes. I don't want there to be a misconception that these four properties are currently Carson City open space or managed by open space.
Right. Currently, they're just chunks of land that nobody's touching.
They're a natural area in the middle of Carson.
Like I said, I've lived up there for 16 years, and they've been doing just fine. So, and if you ask everybody else behind me, it's been a lot longer. Yep, that's what we would prefer. Thank you.
Jen, did you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you so much. Jennifer Budge, again, Parks and Recreation Director. I did want to confirm that, Member Evans' comments are correct. We can't do anything or build anything, whether retention, a building structure, or anything that would not be compliant with the current rules with BLM. Stephanie and I are going to meet with Rob Fellows, our floodplain manager, possibly go out on site, make sure that all the flood needs are being met. Let's say it is really needed. That's not what we're hearing from him, but if that's incorrect and there is changes, maybe that's the technical change that needs to be made to allow for those public purpose uses, which that's what it would fall under. So Public Works manages lands right now that they've received from BLM from the last lands bill for public purposes, and that's a different designation than what this one was made. It's identified as a potential park site. I mean, anything could be potential, but with Prison Hill and with the current uses, it's just not going to be a typical park site. But if it's needed for flood purposes or other reasons that really should be addressed, we'll make sure that Rob Fellows is at the next board meeting, and then we'll do some digging as well to find out what those options might be. But I think they were pursuing some additional options. Stephanie and I were looking at the map on Clearview and Duarte. There's a bunch of city parcels in there that I don't know if that's appropriate for a flood detention basin. I know they've talked about Kuntz and Conti as a location. It's part of a bigger picture, as Stephanie described, and neither one of us are water experts, nor do we want to pretend to be. But I think we need to confer with Rob and make sure we have all the information correct before the board meeting.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
And Jennifer, just if I might, I also want a verification prior to the Board of Supervisors that when it was in BLM, that it was single-family, 1 acre. I want to make sure, because one of the comments I heard, I think from the letter that Mr. Patterson read from Janet, who I used to work with, so I actually kind of know most of you out there. It's important to me that, everyone in the public always thinks we just make these mass changes, and we don't. So I need to have the verification that it was single-family residents to begin with when they bought their homes, because that's what I think it was, but I'd like some verification.
We'll confirm that for you. And then we did pull up the floodplain map and the fault layers that we have on GIS. Stephanie and I are looking at it right now. It doesn't show a fault through any of the 4 parcels or actually anywhere near those properties. The floodplain starts at the the 1 parcel down from the southwest corner and then goes over to Edmonds and then across Snyder and then well into the prison farm property. So if you're trying to kind of conceptualize where that floodplain is mapped, it is outside of the 4 parcels, but not 1 parcel over to the southwest.
and maybe this is just more of a general statement. So what's the importance for us to revert this property? What's the true importance? Is it just to be able to do economic development for infill? If there's no cost, because I'm looking out in an audience that tells me they don't want us to touch it for 28 years, and believe me, I'd be holding you to it. So what's the, right? What do I gain? Do I gain?
What's the benefit?
What's the true benefit? Do I gain $5,000 in a special account? Before I'm going to make a change here or a recommendation, tell me either what the expense is that the city's going to be subject to that we weren't prepared for, because there's no open space dollars, and I assure you there's no park and rec dollar. So either you need to show me a cost center that we're going to have to start doing to take care of the property, or where my benefit is that would let us go purchase another parcel that is integral into one of our plans. So I'm just trying to get a feel for the true need to deal with number 4.
Stephanie Hicks, real property manager. I'll start, and I don't think Jen heard the whole question, so ask her to jump in as we continue. But, we have been looking at properties that are owned by the city and trying to determine, do we have properties that we have no use for, and what are the impacts to those? So when this opportunity came open or was made known to us when the congressman came to the board, this was one that was recognized as a property that had been identified for a park and for potentially a future expansion of recreational that was not going to meet that objective. It just wasn't. And so that is why we identified it for this change in the ownership.
Maybe just to help everyone here, I don't know how many more want to testify, but maybe we just want to discuss whether or not, unless I'm missing something, only property 4 is in question in the packet.
We need to figure out what other ones.
Oh, I know, but I'm looking in the audience.
Okay.
I meant, I didn't see anyone from the audience for this is the parcel of concern on 2, which you already, on other ones? I apologize then. Okay, because I was going to say, for the sake of everyone, it could potentially be we could take action on the others, and then this needs further research before I could
I think you're right on that
vote.
one.
So I was just trying to help I was trying to help everyone to say so you don't have to stay all night or whatever and keep going, because I think 4 is the issue, so okay.
We'll get back to that. We're working on 4 now, but we will get back to 3. Okay, well, let's finish up with these gentlemen, and then we'll revisit 3.
Could I say, if
Good evening, my name is Michael Zola.
Hold on,
and,
the commissioner was speaking.
I'm sorry.
can I say, if we're going to hear the same things from everybody, do we really need to hear the same thing? If everybody's got the same concerns about number 4, I understand that you all have, that you're opposed to moving this land over to BLM. But if you have something new to say, I'm concerned that we're going to hear the same thing for the next 5-6 hours. I'm not sure that we need to do that. I'm just offering that.
What's the commission's thoughts? Open space, park and
How
rec?
about
All right, that's a great question. Is anybody in favor of number 4?
Okay.
All right.
Do you want to have?
Alan?
One alternative would be for everybody who's, opposed to it, we could just gather those signatures.
Exactly.
Would that be acceptable for people?
All right.
I mean, I'm not trying to cut it off, but at the same time, we want to, if you have new things to say, we're glad to hear them. But we want to know who's opposed to it, but we don't necessarily need to hear the same thing.
Sir, you had a question?
We have a
We won't need it.
You have to come up and speak in a microphone,
If you could
please.
come up and state your name for the record to help the recorder, that would be helpful. Thank
Well,
you
let
so
me
much.
interrupt while I'm sitting up at the front table. Michael Zolan, I got bragging rights because I've got 34 years sitting on that hill looking at that dirt. All right, so I got everybody by the short hairs and then some. On your information packet here, I'd like to turn around and mention that you are being misled by the information in here. Okay, one, it says parcels consist of undulating topography, steep slopes and sections with native vegetation and heavily disturbed land due to off-road vehicles. That's not right. You got about 2/3 of that that's accurate and the rest of it's garbage. So I don't know who gave you that information, but it's wrong. Okay? So if you're reading this and not knowing the area and haven't been there for a week or two like myself, you're going to get the wrong impression right off the top. Okay, the other one is off-highway vehicle use. There is none. Okay, every once in a while you get some little kid on a dirt bike going down a hill, maybe a couple times a year, and that's it. Okay, parcel size density in parcels would not be possible due to the undulating topography. That means you're reducing or having to change the 1 acre plus if some guy comes in there and wants to develop it. Now, if you've seen and you know the distances that are out there, the areas in between where our back property line is on Conti and the back property lines on Gentry, those are well in excess of 300 feet. So you would have plenty of room to do whatever it is. So once again, to reduce size, if anything, you could expand the size. But if you're looking at reducing from 1 acre, that's a misleading statement too. As in, like other people have said, maintenance from the city, there hasn't been any. BLM didn't have any. There hasn't been any. Nobody cares because it's well kept and not abused and not used, other than visual impact. The other one is natural drainage of that area is Prison Hill down to that hollow and then down all the way out to Edmonds. And if you look from the water tank area south, you'll see how that slope comes down, goes under, I think it's Valley View, and then comes down between those houses, and you have a long drainage ditch all through there, all the way past Bennett into the south. So that's Mother Nature's natural drainage off that side of that mountain. And all these people ahead of me to turn around and said below they have problems every year, and check with your street department and stuff on how much time and money they put in moving the sand and the gravel and cleaning out the ditches and stuff. So I was kind of upset to see that this is what you're looking at, and having not been there and walked the dirt and seen the area and experienced it, you're getting misled by some of this information, and it's not right. And the other thing is, if you're not spending any money on it, why screw with it? Just leave it alone, let it be. It's been there forever. Like I said, I've been on the hill for 34 years looking at it. BLM didn't do anything in it, the city hadn't done anything with it, nobody's complaining about it. What's the problem? Just leave it alone. Anyway, that's my bitch. That's it. Anybody got any questions?
Okay, so we take one more. Okay, okay, sir. And if everybody who is against us would sign in, please. Sir, we'll take you, and then shall we move on to the next parcel? Would that be agreeable? Okay.
My name's Richard Hansen. I live on Gentry. I actually live on the corner of Bennett and Gentry on the south side there. And the big thing I wanted to say was about the water. It won't affect me, but right now the water comes off the hills in the back there, comes down my ditch, which my ditch is only about 1/3 of the way down my property. Then it starts spreading out the lower third of my property. So even when I put in my sheds, I made sure not to disturb that because I didn't want to eat out the road or anything. But that flows all down into there and then just disappears out in there. If you start building streets, you start putting in houses, the people farther south there, they're going to get that water too that comes tearing down through there. So they have a problem already. They're going to have a worse problem, and that'll cost you money. And as far as any illegal dumping, I took one of my grandsons down there again today because I walk down there every once in a while to see if we found one juice bottle along the road. We got rid of that. The rest of the dumping that you see down there, the newest type of cans on the south side there are probably from about the 60s, when that area used to be used as target range back then, before there was going on. And that's, so mine was real short for you.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions for this gentleman? Thank you so much. Are you going to say anything different? If you can promise us it's different. Do that.
My name is Lisa Shadden. I live on Heidi Circle, and I live in the swale or the hollow of the division there. We moved in just about 10 years ago, and my grandchildren and the neighborhood children have learned a great deal about the nature, about geography, about preservation, about looking at animal tracks and appreciating to know where snakes are by the line in the sand. They and I have left tracks up there and found none from off-road vehicles. There is one dirt road that bisects the Bennett property, Bennett to Hudson. That's used perhaps by the owner of the property at the end, and I park on it occasionally when I'm out there doing my rummaging. I know the property very intimately, and my grandchildren have learned about the history, as this was a dump site, but it's a shallow dump site, and it was burned most of the time. So what's left is glass melted, not shards usually, broken pottery from the Snyder Indian Colony, or the Stewart Indian Colony, I apologize. And I found some militaria in there, not much, so people watching this shouldn't race to the site. But I found one or two little buttons from jackets from the military from like World War II, where they had been burned, perhaps, when they were refuse. So I'm asking to preserve this because it's recreational in the sense that these children are not playing baseball or soccer or other organized sports that the wonderful Pete Livermore stadium or property does. And it provides an enclosed area where we feel safe investigating. We're not out in the Prison Hill property where there's definitely off-road vehicles careening through the fields, or it's not as untouched. We can find a lot of wonderful things in there that the children have learned a great deal about and have taken to share in their classrooms. And I would ask that you keep this space as a recreation site that is undeveloped, because that's the kind of recreation that my family enjoys. And I echo everything they said.
Okay. Any questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to circle back and go back to item number 3, or did you want to speak on 4?
I'd like to speak on 4, please. Hopefully something different. I have some questions. Robin Orloff, I'm a resident of that quadrangle that goes from Snyder to Valley View, that whole Edmonds to Prison Hill, and I live south of this area. And I'm wondering, even if Carson City isn't spending money maintaining it, and I second or third everything everyone said, no OHVs, whatever, is the intent of Carson City to revert it back to BLM with the intent that BLM is going to sell it to bring tax money into Carson City? That's what I understood.
Thank you, Robin. Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. So in the packet, it talks about disposal of the land and it reverting back to BLM for them to conduct that. The proceeds of that would go back to the Carson City special account. And I did want to clarify, there was a comment earlier about why doesn't those funds stay with the federal government? And it does. It goes back to the U.S. Department of the Treasury to manage. We would actually, the city, if we had technical corrections, do an MOU with the local BLM office about the mechanism of those funds and where that could be spent. So that was the technical corrections. The city wouldn't profit from this, but there could be future land acquisitions should it be disposed or sold.
But if BLM buys the land and they sell 1-acre parcels or whatever, there's going to be tax money coming to Carson City.
So BLM wouldn't buy the land, it would revert back to them because they gave it to us, so they wouldn't buy it back. If they do dispose of it and then people purchase it from the public, it would be added to our tax rolls, yes.
Okay.
Whether they leave it as open space or whether they develop it.
But I thought the financial benefit might be if it did go to residents and then thus tax to Carson City. And that leads me into, I'm very glad Rob Fellows is coming in to look at this. I live below the, where this land comes into the floodplain, designated floodplain that Fred has talked about, flood insurance and all that. My understanding is the passageway through this property is the old Prison Creek. That comes from Prison Hill. It's part of the the Clearview stormwater drainage that Public Works has written a treatise on. I think Rob's been involved in that, and he and I have talked about this. What happened above me, the private parcel that someone mentioned was very low. That landowner just cleared his property, and thus the water that's coming from Prison Hill has nowhere to soak in, so I'm getting the brunt of it in the back of my property, which is designated floodplain, but it was a lot worse. And then down to Conti, down to Snyder, all that. So what I'm saying is if someone comes in and develops these 4 parcels as residents, and they eliminate the flora, and there's more impervious coverage with roofs and rain gutters, and we're going to have a mass of water coming down through that area if that land is disturbed. And I can't imagine any developer is going to come in and go, it's going to cost a fortune, I would think, to mitigate that. And also, my understanding from the Carson City ordinances is you can't change a sheet flow to a point flow, and that the south of Bennett, the flow becomes a sheet flow. And how is that going to be directed? You can't really, because of ordinance, make a trench, because that's sheet to point. And I believe that, or maybe that's an NRS ordinance. That's an NRS ordinance. The Carson City ordinance is you cannot cause adverse effects below. So we're dealing with a very complex issue, and the fact that this drains from Prison Hill, even up above Heidi and up above Clearview, maybe we should consider the Kuntz properties and the property up there as a detention basin possibility to protect down, anyway. That's kind of getting off a little bit off the subject. But, and I wonder if the proposal is a backdoor way to circumvent the restriction the BLM places on Carson City as a part of the original land exchange. We're circumventing it if Carson City can't develop the land and we give it back, dispose it back to BLM. They can develop in a way that they've told Carson City we can't develop it, if I understand correctly, in terms of, in other words, convert it to residential property, because Carson City isn't allowed to do that, but BLM could, I guess, sell it for residential use. Correct?
Well, Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director, if BLM sells it, it goes to public auction. They don't dictate the use or the proposed use, and they probably don't care. However, if it is proposed for development, it has to go through the city processes if it is sold to the public. So it would have to go through permitting and review and conditions of approval from flood to community development and engineering, and they would condition that whether it's one home or multiple homes, just like any other city project. So there would be comments about all of the things you're saying, should that be sold, and they have a proposal to do something with it. And I do want to point out, you mentioned Kuntz, and should we have a flood detention or retention basin proposed on that? There is a proposed one, and the city would reserve that in those 6 parcels that are up there. So we covered that earlier, you might have missed that.
I heard that, and that detention basin is more for the water flow going. Would that detention basin be more for the water flow down from Kuntz down Kuntz Lane, whereas the flow I'm talking about through these parcels is coming more from Clearview? It's a little bit further south. So it would almost have to be 2 separate detention.
And we'll get Rob Fellows to look at all this and explain it. We don't want to misrepresent any flood information.
Yeah, okay, excellent.
Okay. Are you going to say anything new? Okay? And after you, we're going to take a 5-minute break.
Okay, thank you again, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Just to open up a little bit different piece of Carson City history. I'm a Carson City native. I was born here, raised here. I previously worked in consulting, and I got the privilege of being one of the first people to write up all of these parcels that were part of this land bill. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, and maybe that error on the BIA property was mine. So I don't know. It's been a long time. I worked on this project prior to 2007, so it's been a very long time. And when the other consultants I worked with and myself looked at these parcels, and especially these 4, because that's what I'll direct my comments to now, the concern was wellhead protection, and the concern was also dispersed recreation. I grew up next to the Riverview Park. I spent my childhood catching frogs on the Carson River and floating the river and playing in the dispersed recreation area before it was even as developed as it is now. So all of that area was where I grew up in Carson City, and it ranged all the way through Silver Saddle property all the way north, and Mexican Dam area. Part of that was public. I also spent a large time of my childhood on Clear Creek, up in the upper parts of Clear Creek. My senior photos were taken up at Clear Creek. So dispersed recreation was a huge part of my childhood here. So when we originally looked at these properties, when we recommended parks holding them, it was not necessarily to develop a what we call like a paved and grassed type of park. Parks and Recreation in many communities holds parks that have just single dirt pathways through them and a small little dirt parking spot for citizens throughout the whole community to enjoy these natural areas. If you've ever read Last Child in the Woods, these areas are incredibly important to the youth of our city, and for even our teachers to take our children out and see the flowers. If you've ever seen some of the monkey flowers that grow on some of these parcels, they're just amazing, and kids really get to enjoy these pieces, and their teachers actually take them to them if there's a place for them to offload them from the bus. So just to give you a background on why I originally put these parcels into a Parks and Rec recommendation at that time as a consultant, was for a very dispersed form of recreation, and this goes for the parcels on Arrowhead as well. So do keep that in mind, that not all of everyone's vision for Parks and Rec or open space is strictly open space or strictly like we're going to have a real park here in the terms of parking lot and grass. Okay? Any questions about why in the world we were thinking what we were thinking back prior to 2007?
Are there any questions?
Could you please identify yourself?
Yes, sorry. I'm sorry. I introduced myself the last time I was up here. Tracy Shane, resident of Carson City.
Thank you so much. And with that, we're going to take a 5-minute break. All right. We've already started. All right, we are back in session. We're going to modify, I did ring the bell.
She did.
Thank you.
I've always wanted to do that.
That's what it really was.
Okay. All right, we're back on the record. Hello. Come on, Kurt. All right, we're going to modify our agenda just a slight bit to accommodate Commissioner Evans' schedule. She's got a few words to say, and then she's going to leave us, and then we'll resume with parcel number 5. Commissioner Evans?
I just wanted to go on the record as saying I think we're moving too quickly on this project. I realize that there is something of a time crunch if we get it to Senator, Congressman Amadei, whoever he is. No offense, man. But I do think that for the most part, we spent a great deal of time going over residents' comments and responses back when this public lands bill was in process. And it feels like we're rushing things now and not taking time to get everybody heard. I recognize what you said about having 2 public forums, but we had a lot more than that back when we were first considering this. So I do need to leave. If I were to vote right now, if there was a vote, I would vote against it. I would like to vote for the acquisition of the first parcel. And apart from that, I would much prefer not to take any additional action without more time to consider, more time to do our due diligence and get input from our citizens. So thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you so much for your comments. We appreciate them. All right, parcel 5. All right, we're going to talk about parcel 5. Are there any public comments on number 5?
We might want to take 5 and 6 together too,
All
because
right,
they're very
5
similar.
and 6?
So parcels 5 and 6 will be for public works purposes for flood control and retention.
Okay, does anybody wish to speak on those 2 parcels? Come on down, and again, re-identify yourself.
I will learn this process. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, all members. My name's Tracy Shane, again, member of the Carson City community, property owner on Ruby Lane. And my questions regarding these parcels is whether or not, if they were to revert from BLM to the city, whether or not dispersed recreation would be allowed on these parcels. If we were to put in stormwater retention in past projects in Carson City, stormwater retention means we're going to put up fences and we're not going to allow people on these lands again. So my first question is whether or not dispersed recreation would still be allowed on these parcels.
Thank you. For the record, Stephanie Hicks, Real Property Manager. I don't think the extent of what those stormwater controls are going to be has yet been evaluated. I mean, it's just a very preliminary conceptual understanding that we know the water is draining through here and that gives us an opportunity to do some mitigation. So I'm not sure that I could answer it at this point. It would certainly depend on the type of improvements that are placed in there, and at this point that just hasn't been determined.
All right, at this point, I would just like to be on the record that these areas, especially parcel, I believe it's not this one, the next one on the PowerPoint, the one that's directly above Bonanza and Conestoga, from what I can tell on this map, that there is a road behind all of these houses that is essentially a fire access road, and not just myself, but numerous homeowners in the area frequent these trails and that particular fire access road for dispersed recreation purposes, and I would not like to see that cut off from future uses, because this is a very heavily used area, not just for, there is illegal dumping in the area, there is also use of firearms in the area that could cause fires. So there's a concern for public health and safety in the area as well with the illegal dumping, but please don't take away our only walking paths that are on dirt. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anybody else wish to comment on 5 or 6? All right, let's.
I had a question.
Excellent, go ahead.
Under recommended action, it says city to acquire a portion of these parcels. Is this the portion, or is it a portion of this outlined area?
Thank you. Stephanie Hicks, Real Property Manager. So the portion that is highlighted and crosshatched is the portion that we would acquire. There's actually multiple parcels and much larger pieces, so we would just be acquiring the crosshatched area.
Welcome.
7.
I'm just getting ready for number 7.
You're number 7? I didn't know we were through, but okay.
We're going with that.
All right, let's hear about number 7. Sir, please state your name for the record.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the commission. I'm Richard Stokes. I'm the superintendent of schools here in Carson City. I just wanted to go on record to say that I felt that the staff from the city, Ms. Budge and Ms. Hicks, have represented the school district's interests correctly with regard to this particular plot. We are studying and interested in the growth that's occurring in Carson City. We don't know exactly how that's going to play out. There is a limit on the large parcels that are left, especially that are designated for school use, and we're excited for the prospects of being able to continue looking at some of these parcels like the one represented in number 7. So thank you for this opportunity to comment.
Excellent, thank you so much. Are there any questions for Mr. Stokes? Comments?
Okay. You would have liked to have been parcel 1.
Thank you so much. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak on number 7?
You're having way too much fun.
Should we just let you sit there?
I ordered her a nameplate.
Madam Chair and members, Tracy Shane, again, member of the community. I just want to get clarification on why Carson Montessori decided they were not interested in this parcel, and to also find out why other parcels are not being considered for use by Carson Montessori as far as school parcels as part of these land revisions. So if there could be additional discussion or brought to light why that's put into the report.
We can't, it's not on the agenda.
It's not agendized, we can't.
Well, in the report, it states that Carson Montessori
But it's
school is not interested, but I just want to clarify that that is 100% correct, since there's been a lot of incorrect information in this report that was given out regarding OHV use and other use.
I can answer that, Madam Chair. Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. I can just let you know that the Carson Montessori came and did a presentation in public to the Board of Supervisors and identified this parcel as one that they evaluated and it didn't meet their needs. As far as the details as why, you could definitely follow up with Montessori directly, but they made that in a public meeting presentation.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to also understand why additional parcels that have been slated for disposal to BLM were not considered for schools as well, such as the parcels at the end of Kuntz and Edmonds, for example.
Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. We went through the entire packet with with Mr. Stokes and a member of the school board, and they were not interested in those parcels.
Were they offered to Carson Montessori for consideration for school?
Well, they're BLM lands. They weren't the cities to even offer. So Montessori's, I think, looked at numerous owners, but I can't speak to their due diligence that they've done. It's zoned single family, 1 acre.
So your recommendation on, I'm sorry to go back to map reference number 3, the parcels at the end of Kuntz, are, they're currently BLM land, and you're recommending that BLM put them up for disposal?
Correct.
But not for possibility for future school land?
If the school wanted to pursue that or do a recreation and public purposes lease for that, they have every opportunity to do that.
Okay, I just wanted to check and understand, because I sat through a long, lengthy meeting about Carson Montessori needing land for a school. So, thank you.
We have as well, and they've met with us, and the school district and the staff's comments just from initial look is there's already significant traffic issues right there at that location, and it probably wouldn't help the situation by having a school at that particular location. But someone would need to pursue that.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your input. All right. Is there anybody else who'd like to comment on parcel number 7? All right, let's move on to number 8.
Number 8 is the parcel that's not accessible and is along the Carson River off of Pinion Hills.
Would anybody like to make a comment on parcel number 8? Any of the commissioners? All right.
That's all the parcels, Madam Chair.
Thank you, I appreciate that. All right, we now have before us an opportunity to make a possible recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. What is the commission's feelings? Are the commission's feelings? Commissioner Bagwell?
I'll take the first stab at a thought process for us to discuss. I appreciate what Ms. Evans had to say. I did pull this off of the Board of Supervisors agenda to have the public comment because I believe in that a great deal. I think it's been in the paper several times. I think discussion with adjacent property owners on the other ones because they're more commercial in nature, like the airport and things like that. So I don't find that we really haven't had good public access points to those. It appears to me number 4, it's not really parcel 4, but number 4 has a few outstanding questions that we all have, and I think that it's important that we have those answers before we can move forward. So maybe just as a thought for all of us is that we could recommend everything except for number 4 and that we take no position on number 4 because I believe it needs a report from Mr. Fellows concerning the detention basins. And I think we need some more flood answers on that. And then I'd also like staff to come back, and potentially this will happen at the Board of Supervisors level, is to, again, the pro and con of the dollar, what happens if we just leave it? Is there really that much benefit to making a change? And so I don't think that was fully vetted. And then I believe they're correct, but I'd like verification that the prior zoning was residential because it's very important to me that we don't mislead people. And so maybe as a discussion, we would take no action on number 4 and then approve the remaining items, just as a potential to put out a motion, see if we could get any support.
I am a little concerned that we're moving too quickly, perhaps as well on number 7. I'm not sure that we've really considered what that might be used for other than a school. And so I certainly think that, the getting rid of the revisionary interest would be useful, but, something along the freeway, something even, way down the road, if we ever had a high-speed rail between here and Reno, where we have a parcel right next to the freeway that possibly could use for a station, something like that. And so I know that's kind of out of left field, but I'm just concerned that we're going to dispose of something that we've had a really hard time of ever getting back.
That one.
I thought the
not that one.
process, well, maybe I misunderstood. I understood
Okay.
that if the school district didn't want it, then the decision would be that we would revert to BLM.
No, we're removing the revision.
Interest.
We're doing what you're saying. We're going to remove the revisionary clause.
So we can
Right.
use it.
For what you're saying.
So Vice Chair Welsh, Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. So it is identified as a school site. The school district has indicated that it may need it. The city could enter into an agreement for the current parcel, so then the school district might operate and maintain it until such time it figures out if it does need it. If it does, it could develop the school site. If the school district does not need it, the reversionary interest would just give the city options down the road. The Board of Supervisors would have to determine if there's another city use for that site or if they want to sell it, but it doesn't revert it back to BLM. Yeah, so it just gives the city options down the road
Right, yeah,
to determine what need to be done.
Yeah, I misunderstood the process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
One comment. During break, a little bird whispered something in my ear that made me think about it. If the city were to retain the properties, item number 4, would the city then have the obligation under the SHPO PA to then manage that resource? Now, we haven't evaluated, we don't know its eligibility, but would the city then be on the hook to manage that resource?
I think that's the whole point of my comment, is I don't think, unless I'm wrong, that we're prepared today to make a decision on number 4. 'cause
Right, totally agree. I think there's too
That's
much-
what I meant about the costs.
Too many questions.
There's too much information that we need.
Right.
To make an
So-
informed decision.
And I think that's a good add to the discussion of information that we'll need, because we've got some great residents out here that have agreed to just leave it alone, but I have little faith on things that have come down on us before that says you will do. So it's a good due diligence, Jeremy. Very good one.
I guess I might add too, just to, I suppose, play devil's advocate on these parcels as well. And just to make my point of view clear, I don't really think they fit as part of open space. They're an island. There's no connectivity. It's 17 acres, which that's not a small chunk, but I'm looking at the map and there's a huge parcel of open space 2 blocks up, and that's Prison Hill. So, just from my point of view, and I did completely note all of the aspects of open space that were noted, and I do not disagree with those. But as far as how these properties would fit if they were to be considered part of open space, I don't believe they fit within our master plan. So that's just my 2 cents on the issue.
Any other questions or comments? So what's everybody's pleasure?
You want me to try? Motion. Okay. I move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors technical corrections to the Carson City lands bills with the exception of number 4 for additional information as discussed on the record this evening.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? All right.
I guess I would like to make sure that we're very clear on if Carson City ends up with some of these parcels, that who is the responsible group, so that we don't have some confusion as to whether something's part of open space or public works or parks or whatever. So just a point of clarification, I guess it doesn't necessarily have to be in this packet, but as part of the information that the supervisors would get, I guess that's my recommendation.
Thank you, Vice Chair. We could add that to the informational packet, so who the internal city department would be as the primary lead for that. You may have several departments, obviously. You have defensible space issues and some, and, other departments, but who would be the lead?
Yeah, I am concerned. if we leave this number 4 out, and of course, Board of Supervisors is going to do what they're going to do, regardless of what we say at this point.
Try to listen.
And I agree with Jeremy. I am concerned that 4 is not really an open space. It's kind of a private park at this point. And I understand that all the homeowners there, they love it, they want to see it protected, and I understand that. And, at this point, they say, leave it alone, we don't care, you don't have to do anything to it. But I also know that if it became a problem someday, if it became a fire hazard, or they had intrusion or anything like that, they would turn to somebody and say, come fix this. And if we say, well, okay, we'll take it out, and so it doesn't get into this land bill, what's going to happen down the road? Who's going to be responsible for this? And I think that's where Vice Chair Welch was going with this. Are we going to be stuck with this in some form or another to deal with now 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road? And we're taking care of a private park for a few residents. And who's going to take care of this?
I think possibly we could in the minutes, because I think it's important, that she has to get the minutes done pretty quickly so the Board of Supervisors has access to the discussion points here tonight. But I think originally on the record, I was pretty honest with everyone that I said it doesn't fit, right? I said, certainly the Parks and Rec Board isn't going to recommend it as a park, and certainly open space, odds are, isn't going to recommend it as open space. So it means, as far as this commissions are concerned, that it would just remain standard city property. It would not be cared for, which again, all of you have said is okay, but it would just be standard property that the city owns. It will not be moved into the master plan as someone suggested. We will not incorporate it in the Park and Rec master plan, and we won't incorporate it in the open space. So I think it would be good that it is a comment that the Board of Supervisors understands that neither body is recommending it be incorporated in their master plans. Just, again, in fairness to all of you and all that.
It would just be city-owned.
It would just be city-owned property like we have some other parcels. So that's, again, on the discussion.
So Supervisor Bagwell, if the city were to acquire it, what mechanisms would be available then to build a detention basin? Is it easier at that point?
No. We already own it. It's whether or not we, at the Board of so I'll put my other hat on slightly here. So at the Board of Supervisor level, we may want to make, after I get the other information from Mr. Fellows, that's why I don't really want to, but what I may be interested in doing is changing the clause or the technical conditions to allow us to build a detention facility if Mr. Fellows tells us, our technical guy, that that's where it belongs and that it would do something. So I can't promise that today either, right? Because I don't have the data.
The information.
But that's why it would be just standard city property that Public Works would handle in the stormwater.
Thank you. Perfect. You answered my question. Sorry for the confusion. It's way past my dinner time.
It's been a great discussion.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
We did.
From Commissioner Cassiopo. All right, all those in favor on open space?
Aye.
Okay. All those in favor from Parks and Rec?
Aye.
Aye. Did you? Motion carries. It's unanimous. Okay. And you understood our motion that we're going to take your concerns into consideration and do more research?
Hope we've done what we can. Okay, where are we on the agenda? We are... Thank you all so very much for your respectful discourse.
Yes.
Thank you. Oh, you have no idea how appreciated that is. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, we're keeping...
What I know, we're going to director's report, item number 4.
Madam Chair, I'm not sure you all received a copy of this, but I just wanted to provide you with the Board of Supervisors action items since you all met last time. October 18th, we had adopted a resolution to designate Carson City as a B-City USA affiliate. It's the first one in the state of Nevada. Also, we had a contract awarded for the swimming pool to replaster the large 50-meter indoor pool and several alternates that go with it that really needed attention over 20 years ago. It should have probably happened. And then also an award of bid for $222,000 for new seats for the theater. And then we'll have further action on the theater and the pool. They're going to have closures this winter. I didn't bring the dates with me. I'm sorry, I can't remember what they are. I'm too tired. But we're going to have significant improvements to both the swimming pool and the theater this winter. So really big projects, and these are two small but very important pieces of those larger projects.
So we're making progress.
We are.
Excellent.
Yep.
If I may.
Commissioner
I know Kurt's
Cassia?
happy.
I think just to piggyback on you, if I recall correctly, the renovations, at least to the seats and whatnot in the theater, I think are happening in early February. Is that?
Mid-November through February.
November through February.
The pool will have a 2-month closure, and the theater will have a 2-month closure, and I apologize I didn't bring the dates with me, but, and they are overlapping a little bit, but not exact dates, but just.
Oh, I'm sorry, and you're right, I think.
November 2nd.
Yeah, I think in
Yeah.
early February is when it's open. The
Yeah.
theater's open again.
Yes.
Yes, I misspoke.
Yeah, so the theater
accommodate
project,
some
just so you know,
production.
is removing and replacing the existing seats. It's resurfacing the concrete floor and staining it, much like we just had at the library, removing the lovely orange carpet that's around the room and serving as acoustics, replacing that and repainting the theater. So it's a pretty significant, especially, it's mostly aesthetic for the most part, but it's a pretty significant project. Then we'll also be removing and replacing the tile in the restrooms at the swimming pool, moving and replacing the partitions in the restroom, hopefully resurfacing the floor, that's the last outstanding thing, and new lockers as well, and painting at the aquatic facility. So both projects are pretty significant and long overdue.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We appreciate the update. Shall we move on to number 5, members' announcements and requests for information? Does anybody have any announcements or requests for information?
We already overwhelmed.
We already gave. All right, let's move to future agenda items for both open space and Parks and Rec. Do any of the members have any future agenda items they'd like to see on their respective agendas? Off on that one too, Jennifer. So let's go to number 7, public comments. Does anybody in the public wish to make a comment on anything we've not covered tonight? Okay. In that case, I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right, we are adjourned.
Best one of the night.